The house sat on the edge of the lake that snaked around the mountains. It had a wrap-around porch, so you could sit and watch the sunset over the water. Inside was a large kitchen with 2 ovens and a breakfast bar. The bay windows showcased the beautiful view and let light stream in from all sides. The house was so vast, it seemed almost indulgent compared to the quaint home across the street. Its neighbor was a cabin-style house. From the outside, it looked like there would have been 2 bedrooms and a small kitchen. I could practically hear people say, "Oh, what a beautiful couple. Disgusting." I watched the young couple move into my house across the street. The house sat vacant for years, and then, out of nowhere, some rich people bought it as a wedding present for their son. At least that's what they said around town. They said also that it wasn't going to be a vacation home. The couple was going to be there year-round. Apparently, since everyone is working from home now, rich people are moving into their vacation homes and treating their place in the city like a temporary residence. It doesn't belong to them, I thought. It was mine. That kitchen I cooked in. The shower where I washed my hair. The best times were when the real estate agent would stage it for showings. When that happened, Tim and I slept over in the bed they brought in to entice people to buy the place. We tried to make it smell weird so no one would. My favorite period was when that couple from Nantucket briefly owned it. It sat fully furnished for months with no one. They even asked me to watch it for them. But these people were going to be here year-round. I had already planned to drive them out. They're rich, so surely some annoying neighbors would drive them to another house they owned. I yelled for Tim. It was time to meet the new neighbors. They were even more attractive up close. I could tell they purchased the most expensive cleansers and lotions. Hell, they probably had a dermatologist and a plastic surgeon they met with regularly. They stood together giggling while the movers worked away, lugging their belongings inside. The man stood tall and strong. He was Indian, and his dark hair was clean-cut and styled with a side part. Sure, he was handsome. She stood just above his shoulders. She had dark blonde hair that looked gold when the sun hit it. Her curls hung halfway down her back. I imagined how easy it would be to snip off her curls. I bet it would be the worst thing that ever happened to her. It would do her some good. Give her some character and humble her. Hi there. The couple turned to look at Tim. I'm Tim, and this is my wife, Charlotte. We live right there across the street. Just wanted to come over and meet the new neighbors. Oh, it's so great to meet you, the man responded. I'm Henry, and this is my wife, Katie. He looked deep into her eyes as he said it. I wish I had something to drop, or better yet, something to spill on them. That's why I started drinking more red wine. I spoke up. Well, aren't you two the cutest? Still in the honeymoon phase, I see. They laughed. Listen, I have an apple pie in the oven for you guys, but we were so excited to have neighbors finally. We couldn't wait for the pie to be done. This place has sat vacant for so long. It'll be nice to have other people nearby. It is pretty secluded, Henry said. I wasn't sure if his wife ever talked or if she let him speak for her. We're hoping to connect with the community, though. In the city, no one knows their neighbors anymore. It's sad. Well, we'll have you over for dinner sometime. I make meat sauce that's to die for. I spoke so sweetly and with the kindest smile. We would love that, Katie finally said. Her voice was like a songbird that you wanted to shoot with a gun so it'd shut up. I told them I would run the pie over once it was out of the oven and cooled. I told them I made it with love. By that, I mean I mixed laxatives into the apple pie filling. My plan was simple. Kill them with kindness. I had to make some adjustments because they were always so lovely every time I knocked on their door. I must have knocked on that door every day for 2 weeks, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day, and still they welcomed me inside with a smile each time. They didn't seem to be off-put by it at all. Tim and I also worked together to give them some serious maintenance issues. I would bake something with enough laxatives to make whoever ate it sick the next day. I made it for the only repairman in town, but Henry would fix the issue each time. Apparently, he was an engineer, and his dad made a fortune by building a plumbing business from the ground up. So Tim and I had to change our plan. Instead of friendly neighbors, we became noisy and overstepped. I started working in her garden. Tim mowed their lawn. I began asking questions about their sex life. Katie was worried that we would hear them. After that, anytime I saw her, I would make an inappropriate joke about it. We spread rumors about them around the town to make them outcasts, but everyone already loved them. They had different people over for dinner every weekend. They raved about Katie's cooking, and Henry could tell a story or two, they would say. Nothing worked. After much thought and discussion, Tim and I decided we would only get our house back if we killed them. We planned to sneak in after the sun went down and would frame it as a murder-suicide. We would slit one throat and 2 wrists. The cop wouldn't wonder why we didn't call sooner, because we didn't hear a gunshot or anything. I volunteered to slit Katie's throat. I made them a cake with enough Ambien to knock out a horse. We watched them eat it through their windows. They loved it. Tim thought we should sharpen our knives, but I told him that we must use theirs. We wore all black with gloves and other safety measures and snuck over. Tim made a copy of their key when he was visiting with Henry. He ordered a key copier on Amazon, like a little spy gadget. It is incredible what you can get your hands on these days. I hoped my house wouldn't be a crime scene for too long, and the family would take a while to move out the furniture. They had a California king bed, and Tim gets so hot when he sleeps. With Katie's favorite kitchen knife, I drew a clean line on her neck. I considered doing some work on her face, but I had to hold myself back. I didn't want anything to raise questions. She didn't wake up or anything. It was so easy. I handed the knife to Tim, who did the same thing, but with Henry's wrists. He, unfortunately, did wake up. The good news is he ate so much cake, even with all the adrenaline, he couldn't do anything other than look at us confused, crying and groggy. He tried to make it to his phone that was charging on the dresser, but couldn't. All this was just too much for me, so I left Tim to move the body to the bathtub. It took Tim forever before he came down the stairs. "We can watch the sunrise. It looks like it's just starting to come up," Tim said. So we did. On our porch, after months, we could watch the sunrise again. The next morning, the cops came and took our statements. We didn't hear from them again, and I just hoped the family didn't move out the furniture for months.
When I signed up for the Tinder app, after copious amounts of persuasion from my friends, I hadn't expected to get a match within the first week. There had been a couple of duds that I had immediately swiped left on, but this one had caught my eye. His profile was fun, and we shared a few interests in movies and books, and the picture showed a cute guy taking a selfie with his cat. I was always a sucker for animal lovers, and from his profile alone, he ticked all the right boxes. His name was James, and he was only a year older than me, so when he swiped right on me, I swiped right back. We started talking the same day. I was a little tentative at first, since it was my first time using a dating app, and I wanted to make sure there were no red flags. But he was perfect. Accommodating, curious, friendly. He showed genuine interest in what I talked about, and it felt like we really connected. When I found out he lived in the same city, it felt like fate. We decided to hold off meeting for the moment, but we spoke almost every day. When I woke up, there was always a message waiting for me, saying some things like, "Good morning," or "I woke up thinking about you." I never met someone who made me feel special like that. Of course, I wasn't completely gullible. Part of me knew from previous experience that it seemed too good to be true. But when I asked him for pictures to prove he was real, he complied easily, sending me snaps of him and his cat in the moments. It was real. He was real. And I thought I'd found my match. The next step was a phone call. I decided I would know for sure if I could hear his voice, hear a real person talking to me, not just a text message. He agreed, and we decided to call at 7 o'clock the next evening. I was shaking with nervous excitement the whole day, and even my coworker and best friend Laura could feel it. "Whoa, what's with you?" she asked once the coffee shop had quieted down after the lunchtime rush. "You look like you're on top of the world." "You remember that guy I've been talking to?" I said, drumming my fingers against the counter. I could barely stay still. "I'm calling him tonight." Laura grinned. "That's great." I nodded. "I know we're taking things a little slow, but I want to make sure I'm not getting involved with someone, dodgy," I said with a small laugh. "Have you seen pictures of him?" Laura asked, her eyes narrowed slightly. I made sure the cafe was empty before pulling out my phone and bringing up a gallery of all the photos. "Yep, he sends them as soon as I ask, so I know they're real. I know he's real." Laura's eyes lit up. Show me," she said, leaning her head against my shoulder and looking down at my phone. "Aw, he's cute, and he has a cat." "I know, and he's so lovely. I really think I found a decent guy, and you know how difficult those are to find these days," I said, rolling my eyes. Laura said nothing. She was still looking at the photos, a small frown between her brows. Something about him seems kind of familiar," she said, her voice pensive. "I feel like I've seen him before." I glanced up in surprise. "Really? I mean, he does live in the city. Maybe he actually lives pretty close." I looked around the cafe as though expecting him to suddenly appear, but the place was still empty. "Yeah, maybe," Laura said, shrugging. "I'm happy for you though, Em. I really am." I grinned and put my phone away as the bell above the door jingled and a new customer came in, and I tried to distract my mind for the rest of the day. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, I was antsy and excited, waiting for James to call. I'd spent the whole day imagining what his voice might sound like and what we would talk about. I never had good experiences with dating in the past, so there was still a shiver of apprehension that something would go wrong. But for the most part, I was certain that James seemed like a great guy. My phone rang with an unknown number dead on 7 p.m. My fingers were trembling as I picked it up and accepted the call. "Hello?" I said, my heart fluttering. "Emma?" The voice was unexpected. That's the only way I could describe it. It sounded like it belonged to a young man, but at the same time, there was a strange breathless quality to it, like it was coming from far away. I heard a soft crackle and the phone line disconnecting, and then someone breathing raggedly. James, are you there?" "Yeah, sorry," he said, his voice cutting. "I'm in a place with bad reception." "Oh, don't worry. You can call back later if now isn't a good time." "It's fine," he said, his voice almost a whisper. I couldn't help but frown. This isn't quite what I'd been expecting, and it was starting to sow doubt in my mind that maybe James wasn't the perfect guy I thought he was. "It's really nice to hear your voice, Emma," he continued, his voice the same static rasp. "Yeah, you too," I said uncertainly. Was I really talking to James? "Hey, how about we call another time? I'm feeling a little tired after work." "If you want," he said concomitantly, and after a short back and forth, we decided to hang up and try again another time. When I finally ended the call, I fell back against my bed with a sigh. That hadn't gone the way I'd expected at all, but I didn't want to give up on him completely just because of a phone call. Maybe he really was just in a place with poor reception. We kept talking for a few more days. James apologized for messing up the call and sent me an adorable picture of him with his cat, who I learned was called Misty, to make up for it. And then we decided to meet up. I felt a little weird bypassing the video call stage, but he seemed eager to meet, and despite the phone call, I was also excited. We planned to meet outside an internet cafe in the middle of the city. I had to take a bus there, and when I told Laura where I was going and who I was meeting, she insisted on coming with me, just in case he wasn't who he said he was. She camped out in the internet cafe while I waited for the postbox outside, where we had designated the meeting points. I waited there for a good 40 minutes before I realized he had stood me up. That's when I knew that James, the embodiment of my ideal guy, wasn't real. Only it was so much worse than I thought. I headed inside the cafe where Laura was waiting for me. and saw her face take on an ashen tinge as she stared at one of the computer monitors, her fingers scrolling down the mouse. "He didn't show up," I said, making her jump. She looked up at me, a strange look on her face. "Em?" she said slowly, turning the monitor around so that I could take a look. "Is this the guy you've been talking to?" On the screen was a photo of James, a few years younger than he seemed now. I frowned. "Yeah, that's him. Where did you find this?" I heard her swallow audibly as she clicked off the image, taking me to the article where it had been posted. "James Ashton," she read out, "dies tragically after meeting with a psycho girl on dating app." I felt my blood rush out of my cheeks, the ground feeling unsteady beneath my feet. "Wait, he's dead?" Laura nodded, her voice wobbling. "Yeah, and he has been the whole time you've been talking to him." As I tried to process the shocking revelation about James, I found myself unable to let go of the mystery. The feeling of being ghosted by a deceased person haunted me for days. I had to know the truth. As I dug deeper into James's background, I discovered a series of disturbing coincidences. Every person who had interacted with James on the dating app had a bizarre encounter, and all of them shared a peculiar connection. They either experienced severe misfortune or met their untimely deaths. I was now convinced that there's something unnatural at play, something sinister tied to James's virtual presence. With Laura's help, I delved even further into the matter, only to stumble upon an old, ominous urban legend that mentioned a malevolent spirit called the Digital Spectre. According to the legend, this vengeful entity preyed on the living by posing as deceased individuals on various digital platforms, seeking to bring harm to anyone who engaged with it. I realized that James was nothing but a malevolent ghost, manipulating tech to lure and harm unsuspecting users. A wave of terror washed over me, but the thought that I had narrowly escaped becoming another victim gave me some composure. But my horror didn't end here. Over the next few days, strange glitches occurred on my laptop and phone. I received cryptic messages from unknown sources, and my mental health started to go south. As days passed, my grip on reality started to crumble. I could hardly leave the safety of my home. With the unnatural power involved, how could I trust anybody? Lines between the real world and the digital realm blurred for me completely. I'd stopped eating and drinking. With each passing day, I was slowly losing it. I was hooked to my phone 24/7. Something dark and unknown was pulling me towards it. Emma, what happened to you? Oh my God! It's been 2 months since I was rescued. Laura has burned both my phone and laptop. I'm slowly recovering, but my therapist says it will take a long time for me to be my former self. I guess I would be better off social media forever.
My name is Eric. A few weekends ago, my girlfriend Nicole had to babysit her much younger half-sister Lucy. Her mom and stepdad were on some vacation, and they didn't have anyone else to watch the girl. Nicole asked me if that would be okay, and I said sure, absolutely. Nicole and I didn't have any children of our own, and I always liked Lucy. To be completely honest, I think Lucy liked me more than Nicole. Nicole was a bit too strict with her, but she saw me as some kind of a cool uncle. When Lucy arrived on Friday night, she completely ignored Nicole and ran straight to me to give me a big hug. "Uncle Eric," she screamed. "Where are you gonna take me this weekend?" Honestly, we weren't planning to take her anywhere, but for some reason I blurted out, "Chuck E. Cheese!" She absolutely freaked out. Nicole did too, but for different reasons. So even though Nicole and I would both prefer to stay inside, we took Lucy to Chuck E. Cheese. I don't think I'd ever been inside one before, not even as a kid. It was pretty much what I expected though. There were loud flashing arcade games everywhere, and a bunch of very run-down looking parents watching their overactive children race around. "Shoot me now," Nicole whispered to me when we entered. I laughed, but I guess Lucy heard her too because she turned around and glared at Nicole. "Just joking," Nicole told her sister. "I love this place." Without saying anything, Lucy ran off to the arcade. Nicole and I found a table that wasn't too sticky, and we ordered our pizza. The two of us sat at the table for a long time. I tried to suggest other fun things we could do with Lucy while she was here, but Nicole wouldn't listen. She kept complaining about how I forced her to come to Chuck E. Cheese. She was pretty mad at me. While we talked, I tried to keep an eye on Lucy. I saw her playing some of the arcade games. Then I lost her for a bit when she ran off to the bathroom. When she came back, I saw her try one of those racing games where the players sit on a big plastic motorcycle in front of a giant screen. If I were her age, that would have been something I like. While Nicole kept nagging me, I watched Lucy race by herself. I guess she dropped something because when she was finished, she got off the motorcycle and started looking around the floor for something. I was about to go back there and help her, but that was the exact moment the pizza came. Nicole shouted for Lucy to join us. When we were all together, I served everyone a piece. As the good uncle that I was, I gave Lucy the biggest piece. She thanked me, but then she passed the slice to Nicole. "Here, Nikki," she said. "You deserve this more than me." For once, Nicole was flattered by her little sister. "Thanks, Luce," she said. I started eating my slice. It wasn't as bad as I'd expected. A little greasy, but I liked the sauce. "Do you like it?" I asked Nicole. She took her first bite and instantly started to choke. I thought she'd burned her tongue or something, but it was much more serious than that. She was choking horribly. She wouldn't stop. She grabbed a napkin and spat into it. The napkin was covered in both cheese and blood. "What happened?" I asked. By then, Nicole had stopped choking. There was glass in my food," she said. She held up a long, thin shard of glass. I couldn't believe it. She almost died. I'm okay, Nicole kept repeating. A waitress noticed the commotion and came over. She was just a teenager, but I was so freaked out that I started yelling at her. The waitress apologized profusely and took our pizza back to the kitchen. She said she'd bring another one, but I refused. We needed to get out of there. By then, the manager came out to talk to us. He tried to offer us a bunch of gift cards. I guess he didn't want us to sue. I yelled at him too. I just couldn't control myself. Nicole was silent the whole time. I think she was in shock. Then I looked over at Lucy to make sure she wasn't scared for her life. That's when I noticed that she was smiling. It was such a dark, angry smile. Just one look at her, and I knew she'd put the glass in her sister's food. "We're getting out of here," I said. "No!" Lucy screamed. She turned toward Nicole. Her face was filled with fake concern. "Nikki, I'm so sorry. That must have been really scary. But before we leave, can you play one arcade game with me, please? I promise it'll make you feel better." "Fine," Nicole said. I wanted to say something, but I still wasn't sure what had happened. I assumed that Lucy was guilty, but I wasn't 100% certain. Before I could do anything, Lucy grabbed Nicole's hand and led her toward the arcade area in the back. She took her right toward that motorcycle game. I followed them. "You can sit here," Lucy said, patting one of the two plastic motorcycles. "I rode this one last time, and it was real fun." Nicole sat down, and Lucy climbed onto the motorcycle next to her. Lucy popped in a couple of quarters, and an image of a racetrack appeared on the screen in front of them. It started a countdown. Right away, I could tell something was wrong with Nicole's bike. It was shaking wildly, while Lucy's bike didn't move much at all. I thought back to half an hour earlier when I saw Lucy crawling around the bottom of the bike, looking for something. That's when I realized that she wasn't looking for something. She was tampering with the bike. "Nicole!" I shouted. "Get off that!" But I was too late. The digital track had a sharp turn, and when Nicole tried to turn her bike, a couple of loose screws popped off and the whole bike crashed onto the ground. Nicole screamed in pain. Her left leg was stuck under the metal and plastic. And to her side, Lucy happily finished the race on her unbroken bike. She crossed the finish line and shouted, "I win!" I crouched down next to Nicole and carefully pulled the bike off of her leg. She was screaming bloody murder, and I couldn't blame her. Her ankle was bent at a terrible angle, and I could see the bones sticking out of her skin. Once again, the manager came over and gave us a string of apologies, but I stopped him. "It's not your fault," I said. And with that, I helped Nicole limp back to the car and drove her straight to the hospital. Lucy sat in the back seat, and she didn't say a word the whole time. When we got to the hospital, I helped Nicole check in, and then I took Lucy straight to their psychologist. Ever since then, Nicole and I refused to babysit. I have a 7-year-old brother named Max. Our parents both work all the time, so I usually have to watch him when I get home from school. He's a good kid, but he's getting obsessed with video games. I didn't want my brother to grow up to be one of those loser gamers, so I decided to scare him away from video games, at least for a while. Like a lot of 7-year-olds, he was afraid of pretty much everything. One time, he walked into the living room while I was watching one of the Scream movies, and he cried for an hour. It took him a full week to go back into the room without crying. My plan was to let Max play a scary game. He'd freak out and then stop playing games altogether. I had to pick something scary, but not too scary. I didn't want to scar him for life. I eventually downloaded Granny 2 on my phone and asked if he wanted to try a new game. He jumped at the chance. I handed him my phone and explained the rules, trying to make the game sound as scary as possible. "Wherever you go," I told him, "you can't make a noise, or Granny will find you." Right away, he looked nervous. He sat on the couch, and I watched him stare into my phone, concentrating as hard as he could. This lasted for about 2 minutes, before something in the game scared him so badly that he threw my phone onto the carpet and ran into his room. I knew my plan had worked. That night, Max didn't say a word at dinner. Mom asked me if something had happened, and I just told her, "I think he's growing out of his video game phase." The next morning, Max seemed to be back to his normal, energetic self. He was still loud and annoying, but at least he wasn't interested in playing games anymore. Honestly, I forgot about the whole thing for about a week. Then one night, Max ran into my room and dove onto my bed before I even woke up. He repeated my name over and over until I opened my eyes and asked him what he wanted. He said that Granny was real. She was outside the house looking for him. Perhaps my plan had backfired. I explained that there was no such thing as Granny. She was a fictional character. But he wouldn't leave me alone until I walked downstairs with him and saw for myself. He basically dragged me into the living room and pointed to the front window. I looked out into our yard, but I didn't see anybody. "She was right there," Max said. "You have to believe me." I walked him back to his bedroom and told him to go to sleep. He started to argue with me, so I gave him my big sister glare and he shut up. Then the next night, Max did the exact same thing. He ran into my room in the middle of the night and said that Granny had broken into the house and was standing in our kitchen. I had to walk him downstairs and show him that the kitchen was empty. The night after that, I had my boyfriend Trent over to watch movies. Once again, our parents were both out of the house. Max was upstairs in his bed, but I warned Trent beforehand that my brother might run into the room and make up some story about a killer grandma. Trent laughed about it, but when Max did exactly what I said, I could tell that Trent was annoyed. I really didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my boyfriend, so I ordered Max to go back to his room. His eyes got really big and he whispered, But Granny is in my room now. She's just standing there." "I don't care," I told him. "Go back in there and pretend she's gone. Don't be a baby." His eyes started to tear up, but he did as I said. He turned around and trudged back into his room, but before he opened the door, he looked over his shoulder and asked, "You promise she won't get me?" "I promise. She's not really there." He walked into his room like a prisoner walking to the electric chair. I waited until he closed the door, and then I sat back down next to Trent. "No offense," he said, "but your little brother's kind of creepy." I didn't say anything. Then about 5 minutes later, I heard a loud knock on our door. I had no idea who it could be. I opened the door and saw a nervous-looking man in glasses. I'd never seen him before. "Hello?" he said. "Are your parents home?" "Yes," I lied. "Who are you?" He introduced himself as Dr. Roberts. He was the director of a private medical center not too far away. He asked if anything strange had happened lately. No, I said. Why? He explained that one of his patients had been sneaking out for the last few nights. She was an older woman who had been in the facility for decades. What does that have to do with me? I asked. Dr. Roberts said, The patient used to live in this house. I thought I'd warn you in case she comes back. But you haven't seen her, right? I asked him what she looked like. He described an old woman wearing a white hospital gown. The woman he described sounded a lot like Granny. My heart started to race. Max had been telling me the truth after all. He had seen an old woman wandering around. She was real and probably sick. Is she dangerous? I asked the doctor. He lowered his head. She's been my patient for nearly 30 years, ever since she murdered her son. Without saying anything, I spun around and ran to Max's room. I pushed open the door, expecting to see the worst. What I saw in that room chilled me to the bone. Max stood in the middle of the room, over an old woman's body. She was bleeding out of her ear. A baseball bat sat next to her. Max turned to me and said, You were wrong! Granny attacked me, but I stopped her. I ran to him and gave him a big hug. It'll be okay. Dr. Roberts ran into the room and found his patient lying on the floor. He looked horrified and heartbroken as he called 911. It's been a few months since this happened. Max hasn't played a single video game since. I want to believe that he's gotten over what happened that night, but lately, I've noticed this cold, angry expression that he gets sometimes. And he carries that baseball bat wherever he goes now. I don't think he'll ever be the same.
I woke up to an open window, and the chill from the air outside blowing stiff oxygen into my lungs. It caused me to sneeze endlessly, and I cussed at my carelessness at such a small detail. The floor was cold, almost damp when I stepped on it, and it caught my attention, even though, as with most things I did late in the night, I only regarded it passively. By the time I had walked to the window and pulled it shut, I knew I would have a difficult time falling back to sleep. I lay on my bed with my eyes wide open, and a mind wandering aimlessly at nothing in particular. A flirting glance at the ceiling, and I knew I could occupy my mind with some stimulation. I groped around the bed and finally picked up my phone from the tussled sheets. It felt warm, I perceived, probably from my long night of tossing and turning on it. I tapped on the screen and it came on. I glanced through the rows and columns of dancing icons, and I settled for my favorite social app, TikTok. I tapped on the icon, and it opened up. Shit, I cussed as the audio climbed sharply, tearing the tranquility in the night air. I brought the volume down to a comfortable note as I acknowledged the video of a butcher tearing into a large cut of red meat. I sighed in satisfaction at his skills as he brought that huge piece into small pieces that would be sold at his local meat store. He mentioned my street as his address, and it was convenient, even though I had yet to notice this meat cutter in his store. I rubbed my eyes and sniffed, making a mental note to visit the meat store when it was time for some cut. I tapped on the profile of the meat cutter in the video and sent a quick message, informing them of their good work. I told them I was around the neighborhood and I'd be visiting in the morning. When I clicked back, a reel rolled into play. The spectacle of a digitally constructed rabbit, huge enough to consume humans with the same nibbling swiftness that it chews vegetables, made me sweat. The rabbit had amber eyes that glowered lazily, almost indifferent to the cries of the digital humans. An unseen hand shoved the humans towards the rabbit, and even though they cried, the hand was unfeeling of their emotions. The rabbit was insatiable, and it chewed on these bloodless creations in such a manner that I quickly scrolled away from the video. Thank you for checking our meat store. Do you mind a personal delivery instead? I froze and read the message twice more. An ominous air wafted in through the windows, which I was sure I had just shut, and filled me with an awry feeling. I thought it was strange that they followed up with such a message. But when I shrugged, I gained some composure. I left the message and returned to the reels on their page, moving to the next video, which was of the meat cutter rubbing two knives against each other. Why won't you answer me? Another message popped up on my screen. The dry clangs of steel rubbing against each other made me uneasy, but it did not compare to the blood-stained rabbit outfit which the meat cutter wore. The eyes on the costume bore a similarity with that digitally created rabbit. And sensing a creepy coolness climb my legs, I began to reconsider browsing through my TikTok at such an hour and absorbing such content. The meat cutter dropped one of the knives on the table and pointed the other at the screen, and I noticed that the rabbit costume had an unsettling smile. I tossed the phone across away from me quickly. "What the hell?" I yelled, jumping away from my bed. I stood at the edge of the bed, watching my phone's home screen blink, shaken from the macabre content I had consumed at such an odd hour. I immediately regretted it. My throat was parched, and I needed water for it. I stormed out of my room door and was just about to make my way into the kitchen when a startling knock came on my main door. "Who's there?" I asked, breathless and panicking. "Hey, Dana." I heard Richard, my neighbor who was a writer by profession, call from outside the door, and I flushed with relief. Hey, Richard." I blushed, one hand on my chest to quell my fear. He wore a stern look which was unrecognizable. My blush waned. He stepped up to me with all of his manly bulk, and I stepped back, squeezing away in puzzlement as he took up the room around the door. "You called for a meat cutter. Why won't you answer?" he asked me viciously. I stuttered incoherently, confronted with his altering, horrible specter. He drew his hand out from his back and placed the rabbit mask over his scowl. My terror was complete. I was pale with fear. "Dana Whitman 07, he muttered. I could not resist when I knew it was you the algorithm chose next. "No!" I squealed and turned around quickly. I raced towards my room, but my beating heart blurred my vision so much it appeared distant. The closest place of escape was my kitchen. I jumped in the door, and in the same motion, I shut it behind me. He cussed out, clanging his knife at the door. I flinched. He earned some room in the kitchen and owned it with his foot as a wedge. I pushed my legs apart and mustered all of my strength to stand firm. He pushed more forcefully, and my weight on the door was staggered briefly. His hand followed the same gap that I had inadvertently released to him, and he swung his knife. The blade ate into my skin with such a pricking sting that it made my eyes water. I shrieked. He withdrew the blade, and I heard him slurp. He moaned softly. "Sweet tasting. They'd love you on Meat Cutter's TikTok. Now let me in." I did not have it in me to resist him any further. My reality had collapsed into a simulation that I did not understand, and I was so scared and exhausted to wrap my head around it. I yielded the door before he could barge again. He stumbled in with his weight and faltered awkwardly as I watched without blinking, until he was impeded by the hard concrete of my kitchen cabinet. His body slumped, but his chest still rose and crashed in respiration. The world fell to silence as suddenly as chaos had erupted. "The cops!" I cried, and rushed out of the kitchen. When the police arrived, Richard was still stunned by the knock to his head. In his fuzziness, he insisted that I had attacked him instead. The cops were not gullible, and as they led him away, I knew I would never see him again because I had planned a trip as far away as possible from where the weird meat cutter on TikTok could find me.
Last summer, I tried Tinder for the first time. I still didn't feel comfortable using an app to hook up with strangers, but all my friends swore by it. My sister Sophie even found her fiancé through Tinder. I wasn't looking for a fiancé, of course. I just wanted to meet someone and have a nice, regular one-night stand. I found a pretty handsome blonde guy who didn't live too far. His name was Adam, and he liked my photo. That's pretty much all I needed to know. I went over to his apartment, and we had a pretty okay time. Afterwards, he went to take a shower and I left without saying goodbye. I got the feeling that he wanted me to stay over for the rest of the night, but I was not interested. The next day, he called me at work to ask why I left without telling him. I had no idea how he got my number. We never exchanged personal information, and besides, it definitely crossed a boundary. I told him to stay away from me and hung up. That evening when I was leaving work, I saw him standing at the edge of the parking lot. At first, I couldn't tell if it was him. He just stood there in the dark. But once I got in my car and drove off, I could see his face, and it was definitely Adam. When I got home, I told all my neighbors to be on the lookout for a tall, blonde man who might try to sneak around my house. I considered calling the police, but I've heard horror stories about the people with stalkers, and the police usually don't help much. For the next week, I was really on edge. Aside from some muddy footprints right outside my bedroom window, there was no sign of Adam. I knew he was still out there, but I never caught a glimpse of him. My friends came over one night, and they all told me that I was acting jumpy. They were worried about me. My best friend Trevor said I needed to start going out again. I needed to stop thinking about Adam. I said I wasn't ready, but he grabbed my phone off the end table and opened it up to Tinder. I'm going to find you someone to get your mind off of Adam. I tried to wrestle my phone out of his hands, but he kept scrolling through potential hookups. Then he stopped and handed me back the phone. What about this guy? I was looking at one of the hottest profile pictures I'd ever seen. Greg. This guy was gorgeous, and all his information seemed tailor-made for my interests. He was like the perfect guy. I figured that my friends were right. I needed to get on with my life. So an hour later, I found myself outside his address. It was a cozy little house in an upscale neighborhood. I knocked on the door, forcing myself to stop being nervous as I waited for Greg to answer. But Greg didn't answer. Adam did. He grabbed me, pulled me into the house, and slammed the door shut behind me. When it was just the two of us in the house, he pulled out a knife. Hi, I'm Greg. What's wrong with you? I asked. Nothing, he explained, making sure he stood between me and the door. I just like to have a good time. I meet women for a fun night at my place, and when we're done, I love to collect. But when you ran off like you did, I was devastated. I never got to the best part. So you decided to try again? And what's the best part? I asked. You made up a fake profile and what? You rented a house? Some people own multiple properties, he said. Don't worry about it. I could tell that there was something he wasn't telling me. I glanced around the living room and saw photos on the wall. They showed a happy family, a husband, wife, and 2 young boys. Adam, or Greg, or whoever, was the father. That meant this was his house, and he had a family. I used that information to my advantage. But what if your wife comes home? I asked. Don't worry, he said. We have plenty of time for ourselves. And then he lunged at me. Moved so fast I couldn't dodge to the side. He tackled me to the floor and pinned me down. And then he tied me up to a chair. I will collect now, Adam roared. He casually walked over to a dresser where he pulled out a trimmer. What was he going to do? With cold precision, Adam began to trim my hair. The pain and terror were unbearable, as I couldn't help but weep. He gathered my tears in a jar, his satisfaction growing with every drop. As the jar filled, I felt a sinking realization that my life was in grave danger. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, and to my relief, his wife entered the house. She wore a sinister smile that sent shivers down my spine. I soon learned that she was just as deranged as her husband, if not more. The sight of me tied to the chair seemed to amuse her, and she wasted no time in joining the twisted ritual. With a wicked grin, she took the trimmer from Adam's hand and approached me. I begged for mercy, but it was as if I had entered a realm of madness where compassion held no place. The wife began to trim my hair with cruel delight, matching her husband's unsettling composure. I cried in agony, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. In a sickening display of sadism, they both collected my tears in separate jars, competing as if it were some twisted game. The pain, fear, and humiliation were overwhelming, pushing me to the brink of collapse. It was a living nightmare I couldn't wake up from. We got what we wanted. We should leave now, Adam said. They left me tied to the chair. As the hours ticked by, my horror only deepened, knowing there was no rescue in sight. After 5 hours, I somehow managed to untie myself and escape. It was raining outside, but my eyes were completely dry. It's been 2 months since that horrifying encounter. I know that forever will send shivers down my spine. I can't help but remember the whole ordeal whenever I cry. Tell me, my friends, should I seek therapy? Should I go to the cops? What should I do?
I was in the middle of drying the dishes when my phone pinged with a notification, almost vibrating off the side of the counter. Wiping my hands on the front of my jeans and tossing the drying cloth over the draining board, I grabbed my cell phone and opened up my notification bar. You have 1 new follower. I smiled to myself. It was only a small accomplishment, but I've been trying to grow my Instagram following for the past few weeks, and every new person that followed me pushed me 1 step closer to my goal. Curious to see who it was, I opened the app and pulled up the profile of my new follower, Mr. Anonymous. Interesting username. He didn't have any posts and his follower account was empty, and when I checked out the people he was following, I was the only name there. It was probably a bot account or something, but hey, anything to get my numbers up. I was about to put the phone down when more notifications flooded the screen. Mr. Anonymous liked your photo. Mr. Anonymous liked your photo, plus 11. Given the flood of likes, he was most likely a spam account. With a shrug, I locked my phone and put it back on the counter as Mr. Anonymous proceeded to like all 72 of my photographs. I'd had a couple of accounts do that before in the past. As long as it didn't ruin my algorithm, I didn't mind the extra likes. Later that night, I was just about to head to bed when I got a new notification. I pulled it up on my phone and saw that Mr. Anonymous wanted to send me a message. I bit my lip, hesitating to click on it. I didn't want to be exposed to anything weird, but I supposed I was also kind of curious to see what he had to say, assuming it wasn't just a bot looking for engagement. Almost holding my breath, I opened the message. Hey, I just wanted to say that I love your profile. Keep up the great work. I blinked in surprise, reading the message several times before it sunk in. He wasn't a bot after all, but a real person. And he liked my content? I couldn't help but smile at the unexpected praise. I typed out a response and clicked send, my stomach fluttering at the thought of a new fan. Thanks, your support means a lot. He replied a few seconds later, almost as though he'd been waiting for my response. You have great photographic abilities. Where did you learn? All self-taught, I replied, with an accomplished smile. That's amazing. Was he genuinely just supporting my work, or did he want something from me? It was always difficult to tell over social media, to gauge people's true intentions. It was far too easy to hide behind a screen. Words meant nothing if I couldn't figure out who the person was behind them. I decided to like his message without replying, since it was getting late and I was tired. I put my phone onto silent and set it down on the table beside my bed before switching the light off and going to sleep. I woke up the next morning to several more notifications waiting to be read, all from Mr. Anonymous. He had left some comments on my photos and had sent another message saying he'd like to speak some more. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to get involved, especially since his account was completely empty, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to send him another message, especially given how much he seemed to like my content. He ended up being pretty fun to talk to. We went from talking about photography and composition to things like movies and the weather. He was easy to talk to, unlike some other people, and he continued to support my content whenever I posted. Things continued like this for a week or so, before I started to wonder if he had ulterior motives after all. His comments went from general praise to zeroing in on specific details in my photos that gave away more information than I had intended. I tried to brush it off as him merely being observant, but things got worse when I posted a photograph of me outside a cafe down the road, holding a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and a chocolate cookie in the other. I'd never disclosed the city I lived in or any revealing details like that, but somehow, Mr. Anonymous managed to find out where the cafe was located just by searching up the name and matching the photograph I'd taken to photos of the cafe online. It didn't give away my exact address, but still, knowing which city I lived in was a breach of privacy I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Every time I posted a new picture to my profile, he would pick out something in the background that gave a clue as to where I lived. I started to feel uncomfortable with his interest and asked him why he was so determined to find out where I was. When he avoided the question, that's when I realized it was time to stop contacting him. I thought he had been a normal fan, but now it was bordering on being obsessive. Nothing good ever came from getting involved with these kinds of people. I decided to cut contact and block his account from being able to see my photos. I started to be more mindful about what I was posting, making sure there was nothing in the background that might reveal my location. I didn't hear from him for several weeks, and I thought the whole business was finished with. But it wasn't. About a month after Mr. Anonymous had first followed me, I was doing a live stream on my Instagram account, answering questions and talking to my followers. It had become a new staple of my profile, and I'd gained some new interest and success from doing it. I had my phone propped up on a tripod filming me while I read comments and responded to them. It was just after 7 o'clock, and dusk was starting to fall, shadows gathering around the room. Everything was perfectly fine until the comments started to change. It started with just one or two until the entire live stream was taken over by people saying the same thing. "Who's that at the window? Sarah, there's something behind you. Look behind you. There's someone standing at the window behind you." As soon as those messages started flooding the chat, dread churned through my stomach, and I was almost too scared to look. Turning my head, I glanced behind me. A face peered through the first-floor window directly behind me, silhouetted by shadow from the fading sun. He was tall, having to bend his neck a little to peer beneath the frame, and didn't move when I locked eyes with him. He just stood there, watching me with a dark intensity in his eyes. After a moment, a slow smile began to spread along his face, the dusk distorting his features, and although I couldn't hear him through the glass, I saw the curve of his mouth as he spoke, the silent words burning in my mind, "Found you." Fear gripped me as I recalled our initial innocent conversations, which had seemed harmless at first. It was just another fan, or so I thought. With trembling fingers, I quickly ended the live stream, hoping that someone watching might call the police. But as I turned away from the window, a sense of unease washed over me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way, but each passing second felt like an eternity. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the window, afraid that he might disappear in a vague capture. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, I heard the sirens approaching. Relief washed over me as the police arrived and surrounded the area. As the police apprehended Mr. Anonymous, he laughed maniacally, claiming that he knew everything about me and would return soon. The idea that a stranger had been observing me from the shadows, gaining access to my private life, made my skin crawl. Over the next few days, the police discovered that Mr. Anonymous was not acting alone. He was part of a disturbing online network of cyberstalkers, each fixated on a different influencer. They exchanged tips and strategies for gathering information on their victims, turning their digital fame into a nightmare of invasion and terror. Mr. Anonymous was eventually convicted and sentenced to prison, but the damage he inflicted on my psyche was irreparable. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and always double-checking my privacy settings. My once vibrant and outgoing personality withered away under the weight of constant fear. Even after the incident, the shadow of Mr. Anonymous lingered. The sense of security I once had was shattered, and I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that there might be others out there lurking in the digital shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. My days as an Instagram influencer came to an abrupt end. I retreated from the online world, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the real world. The once beloved platform became a symbol of my vulnerability, a reminder of how easily the line between admiration and obsession could blur. Now my life is a quiet existence away from the spotlight, but the memory of that evening still haunts me. I will forever be looking over my shoulder, haunted by the chilling words that Mr. Anonymous uttered. Found you. A chilling reminder of the disturbing world lurking behind the screens we so willingly open our lives to.
Two weeks ago, my sister asked me if I could babysit her son, Carson. I wanted to say no, but she and her husband promised to pay me a lot of money for one night. I guess Carson had already scared off all the other potential babysitters. I knew she was desperate, and I really needed the money, so I agreed. Carson is 10, and he's an absolute terror. I'd only babysat him once before, and I swore to myself that I'd never do it again. The whole night, he played these really cruel pranks on me. He hid in the shower to scare me when I went to the bathroom. He stole my phone and deleted all my contacts. He even ruined my new outfit when he splashed me with red paint. When my sister came back home, I told her everything. All she said was that Carson was a good kid. He just hung out with the wrong crowd. I couldn't believe it. She was defending his behavior by saying that his friends were bad influences. I don't even think she punished him. No wonder he thought he could get away with everything. So when I showed up to their house that night, I promised myself that I wouldn't tolerate any more of his pranks. I got there, and right away, Carson acted like a little gentleman in front of his parents. I knew that he was up to something. My sister and her husband left, and I told Carson that he could watch TV while I fixed him a snack. I went into the kitchen to heat up some leftovers, and I started to make myself some tea. Carson was quiet in the other room. I walked back into the living room to check on him, and he just stared at me, smiling. I took a long drink of my tea and instantly spat it out. The tea had this terrible chemical taste. Carson burst out laughing. I was furious. That little psycho had tried to poison me. I screamed at him and told him to go to his room. He tried to argue with me, saying that he'd just added some spices to my tea, and he was laughing the whole time. I physically had to pull him up by the shirt and march him toward his bedroom door. Once he realized that he was in trouble, he stopped laughing. He walked into his room and slammed the door. "You'll be sorry," I heard him whisper. I assumed that Carson figured I wasn't in the mood for any more of his games because he didn't say anything after that. He just stayed in his room. I sat on the sofa and watched some TV for a while. About an hour passed before I saw a movement through the back window. Carson must have snuck out into the backyard. I marched toward the back door and saw Carson walking around the yard. He was wearing a ski mask over his face and had changed into an all-black outfit. Idiot must have thought that if he dressed all in black, I wouldn't be able to see him. I watched through the glass sliding door as he walked along the side of the patio and angrily kicked over each of his family's potted plants. Most of the pots shattered when they hit the ground. "Carson!" I screamed as I opened the door. "Get inside, now!" He turned toward me. I couldn't see his face through the mask, but I could tell from the way he stood that he was angry, like he was ready for a fight. He had one hand hidden behind his back, but his other hand flipped me the middle finger. "Inside, now!" I screamed again. walked back inside, and I locked the door behind him. I was about to lay into him again when I saw what he'd been hiding behind his back. He had a knife, a big one. He held it out toward me, and I instinctively backed away. "Give that to me," I told him. I tried to be firm, but I think he could tell that he was scaring me. Rather than step closer, he started walking around the room. He slid the tip of the knife against the wall, leaving a long scratch against the wallpaper. Once again, I demanded that he give me the knife, but he just laughed. His laugh sounded different this time, darker. Because Carson was only 10, he was much smaller than me, but that didn't stop me from feeling really scared. I had no idea what he was willing to do. He stepped closer. For a long time, he just stared at me through his mask. Then, like a wild animal, he charged at me. I held up my hands to stop him, but he took the knife and rammed it into my palm. I pulled back, falling backwards against the wall. Searing pain radiated through my whole arm. I knew my nephew was crazy, but I never realized that he was this dangerous. I didn't want to fight him. He was just a little kid. All I could do was scream for him to stop. Then, just as he readied himself to stab me again, I heard the bedroom door behind me start to creak open. I glanced over my shoulder and saw Carson walk out of his room. This mask-wearing kid wasn't Carson at all. It was someone else, and I'd invited him into this house. Moving extremely fast, Carson ran forward to protect me. "Get away from my aunt!" he screamed at the attacker. I held my wounded hand out as more blood pumped out, and I watched as Carson dove at the other kid and knocked the knife out of his hands. Until the kid in the mask turned around and raced out the front door. Now that Carson and I were alone, he ran to me and checked out my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Who was that?" He shrugged. "Just one of my friends from school. He was a bad influence." That's all the explanation I got. Carson grabbed my cell and called 911. As he waited for the ambulance to arrive, Carson sat next to me and made sure I was comfortable. He kept apologizing for his friend and promised that he'd protect me, no matter what. I guess he really was a good kid after all.
There's an abandoned McDonald's restaurant near my house. It closed down 2 years ago, and the city still hasn't torn it down. I drive by it every day, and the sight always creeps me out. All its windows are broken, and half of the signs have fallen onto the cracked pavement. Most of the walls are covered in graffiti. One day, my brother Victor convinced me to go with him and explore the building. He called it urban exploration. I thought that was an absolutely terrible idea, but I was also really protective of my brother, and I didn't want him to go there alone. So I said I'd go with him, but we'd only be there for 30 minutes maximum. We got to the empty parking lot. Victor was literally shaking with excitement. He told me to wait outside while he went in first. Before I could answer, he ran in. I waited in the parking lot for a long time, but Victor didn't come out. There's no moon that night, so it was too dark for me to see inside the restaurant. I didn't hear anything either. I called out to Victor, but he didn't answer. I knew that something bad must have happened. Maybe there was some dangerous homeless man inside or something. I took a deep breath, turned on the flashlight on my phone, and walked inside. The whole place was empty. I walked over broken glass and piles of trash. I looked in the bathrooms and the kitchen in the back, but I couldn't find signs of Victor anywhere. I was scared, but I was also angry. I thought that Victor was messing with me. This must have been his plan all along. He probably snuck out the back and ran home without telling me. I checked the back door, which was locked, but maybe he found another way out. So I went straight home, expecting to see Victor sitting on the couch. He wasn't there. That's when I got really nervous. I called his friends and asked if they knew where he was. No one did. His best friend Joe, the last person I called, offered to come over and help me look for Victor. He got to our place 10 minutes later, and together, we walked back to the McDonald's to look around. The whole time, he assured me that everything would be okay. I didn't really believe him. We were walking through the main room of the building, looking under tables and behind the counter, when Joe completely froze. I asked him what was wrong, and he said that he heard a noise coming from the back of the building. I didn't hear anything. He told me to wait there and walked into the dark kitchen to look around. He was gone for less than a minute before I heard him scream at the top of his lungs. I jumped over the counter to find him, but when I got into the kitchen, he was gone too. Like Victor, it was like he'd completely disappeared. Then, I heard soft laughter coming from behind the pantry door in the corner. I could tell that it was Victor's laugh. That's when I knew that he was still messing with me and Joe was helping him. I was so angry. I marched to the pantry door and pushed a metal trash can in front of it, trapping them both inside. They started pounding on the other side of the door. Victor and Joe screamed at me to let them out. Victor said, "Chill out, it was just a joke. It wasn't funny." I told them, "I'm not going to let you out until you apologize." And they didn't. They just laughed again. "Fine," I shouted. "I'm leaving." As they kept laughing, I marched out of there and went back home. I know it was a mean thing to do, but I was angry. I decided to let them sit there for a half hour, and if they still hadn't gotten out, then I'd go back and open the pantry door. The trash can wasn't that big, so they'd probably be able to push their way out anyway. And they both had cell phones, so they could call someone else for help. But when I got back home, I was shocked to see Victor and Joe sitting quietly in the living room. They were staring at the TV even though it wasn't on. "How'd you get back here before I did?" I asked. They looked at each other. Then at the exact same time they said, We never left. It was such a weird, unnerving thing to say. I had no idea how to respond. They stared at me for a long moment, their faces blank, and they both smiled. "Just messing with you," Victor said. I left the room after that. I was done dealing with their stupid pranks. For the next few days, Victor kept acting weird. When he wasn't at work, he'd just wander around the house, not saying anything. Every night, Joe would come over and they'd just sit together in silence. I couldn't help but think that they'd both seen something in the pantry, that they'd both been so spooked that they were still in shock. I asked Victor several times if something was wrong, but he'd either ignore my question or he'd mumble, "Why'd you leave us there?" After 4 days of this, I'd had enough. I waited until sunset when Victor got home from work. He was still acting weird, so I told him, "I'm tired of all this. If something's happened to you and your friend at McDonald's, just tell me. Otherwise, I don't want to talk about your stupid prank ever again." "It wasn't a prank," he mumbled, and then he walked into his bedroom. Less than 5 minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was Nadia, Victor's boss. I was glad she called. Maybe she could tell me if he was acting weird at work too. Before I could say anything, she asked me if I'd seen my brother anywhere. "He just walked into his bedroom," I told her. Then she asked if he was okay. She said that Victor hadn't shown up to work in 4 days. He didn't call or anything. I couldn't believe it. What was going on? I walked into Victor's room to give him the phone so we could talk to his boss, but the room was completely empty. The window was locked from the inside and there was no other exit. I told Nadia I'd call her back. Then, I looked through the entire house and still couldn't find him. It could have been round 2 of his stupid prank, but I knew in my bones that something very bad was going on. I did the only thing I could think of. I walked back to that empty McDonald's. All alone, I walked through the main door and into the kitchen. The pantry door was still blocked by the trash can. I slowly opened the pantry door and saw Victor and Joe lying on the dirty floor. They looked like they were sleeping. I walked to Victor and shook his shoulder. His head rolled to the side, and I could see that his eyes were glossy and dead. He and Joe had suffocated inside the room. They smelled awful too, like they'd been there for days. I instantly called the police and reported what I saw. I was too freaked out to stay inside, so I met the officers in the parking lot. They asked me a bunch of questions, but I honestly didn't know how to answer. If they'd been there this whole time, then who was in my house?
Last September, my husband Mike and I moved into a house in the suburbs. He wanted to live closer to his mother Gloria, who was dying of cancer. He had taken a month off from work, and every day he went over to Gloria's house and helped take care of her. Even though Gloria's hospice wasn't that far from our house, I never went. I never even met Gloria. Mike said that she was too sick for me to meet. I felt awful about it, but I honored my husband's wishes. Because I worked online, I ended up staying all day in our new house while Mike was with his mom. I didn't have any friends in the area, so I felt very isolated and alone. One evening, I was home alone when an older woman came to the door. She was very normal looking. At first, I thought she was a neighbor who wanted to invite me to something. But then she said that her name was Gloria. She was Mike's mom. I instantly let her in and offered her some tea. She looked extremely healthy for a woman on her deathbed. We sat at my coffee table and I asked her, "Does Mike know you're here?" If Mike was at Gloria's house right now, did he know that Gloria had wandered all the way over here? I've heard stories about old people that leave their houses without telling anyone and walk to some pretty random places. Mike has no idea, Gloria said. I haven't seen him in 7 years. When she said that, I knew that this was some kind of scam. I stood up and told her to leave. She begged for me to let her stay so she could finally see her son again. I told her that I knew she was lying. Then she pulled out her wallet and showed me a photo of her and Mike together. Mike must have been 12 or 13 at the time. When that wasn't enough to convince me, she pulled out 6 more photos, each one showing her and Mike from different time periods. I couldn't believe it. This meant that the woman was telling me the truth, and that Mike had been lying to me about why we moved here and where he went each day. I didn't know how to handle the information, so I told Gloria to leave. She did. When Mike got home, he seemed really stressed. I didn't confront him at first. I just casually asked what he did that day, and he told me that he spent all day taking care of his mother. I knew that was a lie, but I didn't say anything. The next morning, Mike left at his usual time. I waited until he was at the end of the street before I got in my car and followed him. He ended up parking in front of an old house just 3 streets over. I parked next to some bushes and watched from the car as he approached the house. He knocked on the door, and a beautiful blonde woman answered. They talked for a while on the porch, and then she pulled him inside. Obviously, he was having an affair with this woman. His whole story about taking care of his mother was just an awful lie. I drove back home. That night, I planned to tell him everything, but he didn't come home. I waited for 30 minutes, feeling myself getting angrier by the minute. When he finally called and said that he'd be late, I assumed his secret girlfriend was keeping him busy. I was so mad, but I didn't dare bring it up over the phone. I needed to see his face when I told him that I knew, so instead, I innocently asked him why he was going to be late. He said that his mom had an episode, whatever that meant, and he wasn't sure how long he needed to be there. Fine, I said. Bye. Immediately after I hung up on him, I heard someone walking around in the front yard. I looked through the window and saw a dark figure wandering around the bushes. Hey! I shouted. Go away! The figure stepped out of the shadows and it was Mike's mother again. She walked to the house and looked at me through the window. She apologized for coming back at this time of night, and she asked if I could let her in again. I considered telling her no, but then I thought about how perfect it would be to have Mike's real mother there when I confronted him about his lies, so I opened the door and welcomed her in. She sat on our sofa, instantly making herself comfortable. I asked if she wanted anything, and she just told me to sit next to her. All she wanted was to talk, and she had a lot of questions for me. I sat next to her, and she started to ask me about my relationship with Mike. How did we meet? How long were we together? Were we happy? I answered all of her questions, except for the last one. Then she asked where Mike was right now, and I didn't have the heart to lie to her. Mike was the one cheating. It wasn't my secret to bear. So I told her that Mike was hooking up with another woman and telling me that he was busy taking care of his mother. Gloria jumped to her feet, grabbed her hair, and screamed so loudly I was sure the neighbors heard. She wouldn't stop, so I stood up and tried to give her a hug to calm down. She pushed me back. Then she grabbed a vase and slammed it against the side of her head. It broke against her temple. She picked up one of the jagged shards and pointed it at me like a knife. "You're a liar!" she screamed. "What? My beautiful baby boy would never treat a woman like that!" Even though this woman was much smaller and older than me, I did not want to mess with her. She looked crazy enough to do some real damage. As she swiped the broken shard at me, I ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mike's number. I could hear Gloria scratch into the other side of the door. She screamed at me again, but I couldn't tell what she was saying. Mike answered and asked if he could call me back. It wasn't a good time. "No," I said. "Your real mother is here and she's gone insane." "What?" he shouted into the phone. "She's at the house? Don't move." Then he hung up. He arrived 5 minutes later. I was still hiding in the bedroom, but I could hear the front door open. I could hear the woman scream at Mike as he calmly tried to talk her down. Then I heard a loud thud and shattering glass. It sounded like she attacked him too. No matter how angry I was at Mike, I had to help him. I opened the door and saw Mike lying on the floor. Gloria was crouched over him, squeezing his throat with both hands. I ran to pull her off, but then someone else grabbed me from behind. "Don't interfere," she said. I turned around and saw the blonde woman, Mike's mistress. Why was she here? Now that I was looking at her up close, I saw that she was older than I thought. She wore a name tag and a stethoscope. She wasn't Mike's mistress at all. She was a nurse. The woman pulled out a syringe and walked toward Gloria. She was going to inject the old woman with some kind of sedative. She tried to grab Gloria's arm, but then Gloria elbowed her in the stomach and she dropped the syringe. I had to help. While Gloria kept strangling Mike, I ran over and grabbed the fallen needle. "In the leg!" Mike screamed. "In the leg!" I injected whatever medicine into Gloria's leg and she instantly flopped onto the ground asleep. Mike struggled to catch his breath. Then he stood and carefully lowered his mother's unconscious body onto the sofa. He turned toward me. "Now do you understand why I don't let you see my mother?" He explained that he'd been taking care of his mother all this time, but he'd lied to me about her sickness. She didn't have cancer. She had 8 different psychological conditions that led to lying, stealing, and extremely violent behavior. The blonde woman was one of several full-time nurses that took care of her. He said that she'd escaped the day before, which was when I first met her, and then tonight, she escaped again. He had no idea she'd tracked down his new house until I called him. I guess he'd mentioned our address once to his mother and she memorized it. The blonde woman walked over and checked my arm, which had gotten scratched up in the struggle. Then she and Mike carried Gloria back to the car. It's been 6 months now, and Mike has finally moved his mother into a high-security facility. She hasn't escaped from it yet, but I think it's only a matter of time. I know she'll try to come back, but I pray that she never will.
Late August, my boyfriend Johnny and I moved into a new apartment together. I picked it out, but I was pretty sure that Johnny loved the place as much as I did. We'd been dating for 2 years, and it was finally time for us to live together. We were both living with other roommates at the time, though Johnny liked his ex-roommate a lot better than I liked mine. He lived with a guy named Riley who was on his baseball team. They'd known each other since high school and were pretty close. Riley was excited that we found a new place for ourselves, even though he was a little sad to lose his roommate. My ex-roommate Judy, however, was a completely different story. The only reason I lived with her was because I had answered a Craigslist ad and I was desperate. From day one, we never got along. She always ignored me unless she wanted to ask me a favor. She tried to seduce Johnny multiple times, not because she liked him, but because she just wanted to make my life miserable. Now that Johnny and I had an apartment to ourselves, I knew that I would never see Judy again. Riley would probably come over and visit a lot, but I made sure not to give Judy my new address. She was not my friend. The place wasn't too nice, but there was more than enough space for me and Johnny. We even had a guest room that Johnny could use as an office. Plus, the kitchen was huge. Sure, we were paying a bit more than we could afford, but otherwise everything was just right. We both took a week off from work so we could settle in and unpack. But on our third day there, Johnny got called into a last-minute meeting. He was gone for the whole day. I kept busy, mostly fixing up our kitchen, but by the time night had fallen and Johnny still hadn't come back, I got a little spooked. I thought that there was someone wandering in our backyard. Our apartment was on the ground floor with a little courtyard in the back. It was a public space, of course, so anyone who lived in the building could go back there. But I kept getting the feeling that someone was sneaking around outside and peering into our windows. I knew that I was probably being paranoid. To prove to myself that nothing was wrong, I walked into the courtyard and looked around. No one else was there, but I noticed shoe prints in the dirt right outside our window. It sure looked like someone had been there, like someone had been spying on me. Johnny came home a little bit later, and I told him my concerns. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me that I just had new apartment jitters. I figured he was right. But then the next morning, I was about to go to the supermarket when I noticed that someone had broken all the windows on my car. I ran back inside to get Johnny, and together, we called our landlord and told him about the vandalism. I was going to tell him about the weird footprints too, but Johnny stopped me. Our landlord said that he'd call a mechanic to fix the windows, but he couldn't do anything else. He said that the security camera had malfunctioned the night before, so there wasn't any footage of the vandal. That was when I started to get really nervous. This could have all been unrelated, but then again, it could be someone trying to scare us out of our apartments. I was too freaked out to go to the supermarket, so we ordered pizzas for dinner and asked Riley if he wanted to come hang out. I didn't know Riley nearly as well as Johnny did, but I knew he was a good guy. I figured that if we told him about our potential stalker, he'd listen. He'd probably even talk some sense into Johnny, who seemed to be taking all this much less seriously than I was. That evening, Riley showed up with a potted plant as a housewarming gift. The three of us sat in our new living room, talked, and ate pizza. We all had a good time catching up, but whenever I started to bring up my fears, Johnny would very quickly change the subject. I guess he didn't want me to ruin our night. A few hours later, after we were all a little drunk, Riley started telling us a story from his work, but in the middle of the story, he froze. He was staring in horror outside our back window. "What's wrong?" I asked. He said, "I think there's someone out there spying on us." "I knew it!" I shouted. "Johnny, call the police!" Johnny ignored me. Instead, he turned towards Riley and asked exactly what he had seen. Riley explained that there was a woman outside. She was tall and blonde. She wore thick glasses. I couldn't believe it. Riley had just described my ex-roommate Judy. They never met before. And, Riley added, she was holding a baseball bat. "What the hell?" Johnny shouted. He jumped to his feet and started toward the door. "What are you doing?" I asked. "We need to just call the police." "I can handle this," he said. We opened the door to leave, and we saw a car drive out of the parking lot. "She must have just left," Riley said. "Johnny, you need to follow her." Johnny nodded and then walked right out the door. He didn't even say goodbye. I turned toward Riley, who was smiling for some reason. "It'll be okay," he told me. He stood up and walked toward the door. Then he clicked the lock and deadbolt into place. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Protecting you," he said. "We'll be safe in here." "But Johnny will be able to take care of himself," he answered. Then he sat right next to me. Too close. "You're trembling," he told me. "I'm okay," I lied. He slid his arm over my shoulder and said that everything would be fine. Johnny would find the woman who was messing with us, and in the meantime, he'd be here to protect me. "I don't need protection," I said. I tried to push him away, but he wouldn't let go. I told him that I could protect myself. I told him to leave. "Not gonna do that," he said. I know you're still freaked out over the broken windows. It'll be fine, trust me." I didn't trust him. It was like I was seeing him for the first time, seeing what he was truly like. His eyes were dark and cold. His smile was not a happy smile. "How did you know about the broken windows?" I asked him. We never told him about that. He stared at me for the longest time. Then he said, "Oops." I pushed him off me and jumped to my feet. "It was you all along," I said. "You snuck around the house. You vandalized our car. You probably didn't even see anyone out there, did you?" "Okay," he admitted. "You got me." "Why are you doing this?" "Isn't it obvious?" he asked. "Because I love Johnny. I always have. I thought that you were just a phase, but no! He left me for you! You were just his roommate. And I was the best roommate he's ever had. And after tonight, he'll move back in with me and everything will go back to the way it was." Riley started walking towards me. One hand was behind his back. He was hiding something. A knife? A gun? "What are you going to do to me?" I asked. "I'm not gonna hurt you, silly," he said. "I'm just gonna help you sleep a bit." And with that, he revealed the chloroform-soaked cloth that he was hiding behind his back. In a single motion, he surged forward and shoved the cloth over my face. In seconds, I was out. When I came to my senses, I was tied up in a dark room, probably a closet. From the pain in my wrists and ankles, I could tell that I've been tied up for a while. I tried to speak, but my mouth was duct taped. And after my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see a sliver of light. The closet door was an inch open, and I could see out into the living room. I saw that Johnny had just returned. He and Riley were standing just outside. "Where's Rachel?" Johnny asked. "I just went to her ex-roommate's house, and she was having a party. That proves she's not the one messing with us." "I see," Riley said. He glanced nervously at the closet. "Well, I'm sorry, man, but Rachel left. She said she couldn't handle living here anymore." "She left me?" Johnny said. Riley stepped closer and hugged him. "I'm sorry, man. It was like she had a nervous breakdown." I tried to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I started thrashing around, trying to make any noise so that Johnny would know that I was still there. He needed to find me. I kept rocking my body, kicking against the wall until a single broom clattered to the floor. Johnny definitely heard that. He started to run toward the closet door, but Riley stopped him. "Don't worry about it," Riley said. "She's gone now, but I'm here." Johnny pushed him away and ran to the door. He pulled it open and saw me bound and gagged on the closet floor. "What the hell?" He turned to look accusingly at Riley. "Oops," Riley said again. "I had this long plan, and Rachel figured it out too soon, so I didn't have time to dispose of her." My heart filled with hope. I knew that Johnny was going to untie me and call the cops, but he wasn't moving. I thought he was in shock because he just kept staring at me. "It's not what you think," Riley said. "Don't be mad." "Stop!" Johnny shouted. I'd never heard him so loud. "I know exactly what you're doing. You want me back. You think that if you terrorized her and drove her out of our new apartment, then I'll finally break up with her like we always talked about." "What?" I tried to scream, but it just came out as a sad, muffled moan. Johnny stepped closer to Riley. "You did all that for me?" Riley nodded. The two men left me alone to talk in the other room, in private. I was still tied up and seething with rage. After a few minutes, Johnny came back into the hallway alone. He untied me, said he was sorry. Then he drove off with Riley. I thought about calling the cops, but in the end, I decided to just let it go. After Johnny came back for all his stuff, I never saw him again. And for the record, I still live in that same apartment. It's not half bad.
My name is Maria. I'm a freshman in college, and I think I'm a pretty confident person. Back in high school, though, I was extremely shy. Back then, A few guys asked me out and I always said no. I was just too afraid to get close to anyone. All that changed my senior year when I met Justin. Justin was everything I wanted in a boyfriend. He was smart, funny, really good looking. He was almost too good to be true. He asked me out in history class, and we ended up meeting up at an Italian restaurant for dinner. His treat. We had so much to talk about. It was amazing. Once the waiter dropped off the check, Justin paid and asked if I was ready for him to take me home. I told him no. I wanted this night to last forever. He got this strange look on his face and said, "Do you want to go to the most romantic place in town?" "Of course," I said. So we hurried outside, and instead of going to his car, we left the parking lot and walked onto the street. I had no idea where he was taking me. I'd driven on this road before, and aside from the Italian restaurant and some old hotels, I didn't think there was anything else in walking distance. Then we got to an old iron gate, and my heart sank. He was taking me to the cemetery. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Trust me," he said. "This is the most romantic place in town." He smiled at me and reached for my hand. "Will you come with me?" "No!" I screamed and ran away from him. I thought that this night was too good to be true, and I was right. He was messing with me. He was going to take me into the cemetery and play some horrible trick on me. He'd probably just leave me there. I mean, why else would he take me to the cemetery? Well, I had too much self-respect to let him get away with that. Unfortunately, I had no idea where to go from there. I just kept running down the sidewalk, and the cemetery just rolled on and on. It must have been huge. I kept running until I saw a man standing up ahead. He was dressed all in black, so I assumed he'd just come from a funeral or some grave visit. He asked me where I was going, and I told him that I just wanted to get back to the city center. "You're in luck," he said. "Cherry and Elm Roads are just on the other side of the cemetery. I come here a lot, so I can show you a shortcut." Before I could answer, he started walking toward the side gate. I was hesitant to follow him, but I really didn't want to see Justin again. And the guy seemed pretty normal, so I followed him through the gate and into the cemetery. Together we walked through rows of graves. "It's just up ahead," he said. "Just a little bit farther." I followed him past a new gravestone and an open hole where someone was going to be buried. A chill ran down my spine. I started doubting my decisions. Why had I followed him? Why had I agreed to enter this horrible place? "Maybe I should go back," I said. "My friends are probably waiting for me." He looked at me for a long, silent moment, and he smiled. "You never mentioned friends before," he said. "Yeah," I said. "They're trying to find me right now. They're pretty close." The night was already cold and dark, and now that we were stuck in the rain, I felt so scared and vulnerable. I started walking back toward the gate where we entered, but the man rushed forward and grabbed my wrist. "Did I say you could leave?" "Please," I said. "I'm just going back to my friends." The rain was getting worse. A streak of lightning lit up the air. "We both know there's no one else here," he said. "What idiot would come to a cemetery in the middle of a rainy night? Besides you, that is." He started pulling me by my wrist. I used my free hand to hit him, but he would not let me go. He kept pulling me harder and harder until we reached that open plot. It was a perfect rectangle, 6 feet deep. 2 shovels were laying by its side. "Do you want to jump in?" he asked. "Or do you want me to push?" "Neither!" I screamed. He used both hands to pull me toward the hole. He was so strong. I screamed as loud as I could for him to stop, but he wouldn't. And then he froze and his hands lost their grip. In less than a second, he let go of me and fell into the hole himself. I looked up and saw that Justin was standing there holding a shovel. I guess he had bashed the man on the head. I looked down in the hole and saw the man lying on the dirt. He was conscious but barely moving. There was a big bloody gash on the side of his head. What? He mumbled. Let me out. Who was that guy? Justin asked me. I have no idea. From the hole, the man was mumbling something I couldn't understand. Then I realized he was threatening us. He said that we assaulted him. He said that he'd sue us for everything we had. He said that he was just playing an innocent joke on me, and we attacked him out of nowhere. So if we let you go, Justin asked, you'll go straight to the police and report us? Yes, he said. Okay then, Justin said, and then he took his shovel and started to throw dirt over the man. What are you doing? I asked Justin. What does it look like? He answered. You heard what he said. As Justin shoveled in more dirt, the man began to choke. I was kidding, he sputtered. I won't say anything. Justin turned toward me. So, he said, do you want to help? I looked at Justin for a long time. After everything that happened that night, I finally trusted him completely. I took the second shovel and helped him bury the man alive. It took about 10 minutes for the man to stop screaming, and then another 20 to fill up the rest of the hole. Then Justin put both of our shovels exactly where we'd found them. The rain would wash away our fingerprints and footprints long before anyone discovered the body. By then, the rain had let up and little streaks of moonlight shined down on Justin. He was so handsome. Well, he said, can I show you my favorite spot now? I nodded. He took me across the cemetery until we found a mausoleum decorated by 2 kissing statues. There was a marble bench in front, and Justin sat on it. I joined him. Even though we were soaking wet, we sat there for the longest time and just enjoyed each other's company. Since then, Justin and I started dating officially. We're still together. Like I said, he's done a lot for my confidence, and as for the guy that we buried, I have no idea what happened to him. I assume someone found his body, but no one traced it back to us.
A few weeks ago, my boyfriend Sam broke up with me out of nowhere. We'd been together for 3 years, and I always thought we were happy. I thought he loved me. But as soon as I got home from work, he told me to pack up my stuff and leave. He said it wasn't working between us. I tried to talk with him, but he wouldn't get more specific than that. I was so angry, I rushed out of there with no idea where to go. I didn't bring anything with me. There was a McDonald's near his apartment, so I decided to stop there for some food and to figure out my next steps. It was the only place nearby that was still open at this time of night. The only other customer there was an old lady sitting by herself. She was fat, wearing a loose dress and a big flower hat. She looked very motherly. She waved at me, but I was too distracted by my own problems to wave back. I placed my order, and as I went to sit down, the old woman gestured for me to join her. I didn't feel like talking with anyone, but I thought it would be awkward to ignore her since we were the only 2 people in the restaurant. So I sat across from her. She smiled at me and said her name was Doris. She said that I looked like I could use some company. And just like that, I told her my whole sad story. I don't know why I did it. I guess she just seemed so compassionate, like she was genuinely worried about me. When I finished, she said, "It's okay. Things will work out in the end." Then, she started asking me questions about Sam. I felt like she wanted to help me figure out why my boyfriend would kick me out without an explanation. Pretty soon, my food came. That's when I realized that Doris didn't have any food of her own. She noticed my confusion and explained that she already finished. Now she was just here to cheer me up. It was a really nice thing to say. Then, her expression got dark, and she asked me if I wanted to get revenge on Sam. I laughed and said, "Obviously." Doris stood up, hugged me, and left. She didn't say anything else. It was all very strange. After that, I ended up staying with my sister Emily for the night. The next day, I called Sam to ask if I could pick up my stuff. I hoped that maybe he changed his mind and it would ask me to come back, but he didn't answer his phone. So I drove back home and figured I'd just talk to him in person. When I got there, the house was empty. Sam was probably out celebrating his new single life. I gathered up as much of my stuff as I could and was about to leave when I noticed something strange on the dining room table. It was a big flowered hat, the same hat that Doris had worn the night before. Chills ran through me. This didn't make any sense. I took one more look throughout the house. Besides the hat, nothing was out of the ordinary. I told myself it was just some weird coincidence, and I left. After that, I settled into my new life at my sister's. A few days went by, and I still hadn't heard anything from Sam. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop thinking about that stupid hat. I eventually went to Sam's work to finally get some answers. He wasn't there either. His boss told me that he'd sent her a text saying that he was quitting. It didn't seem like something he'd do. He loved that job. I was becoming more and more certain that Doris had done something to Sam. I couldn't think of any other explanation. I even went back to his house one more time. Of course, he wasn't there, but I noticed that his car was still in the garage. That's when I called the police to report a missing person. I told them everything. I even described what Doris looked like. The officer I talked to didn't believe me. He said he'd look into it, but I could tell that he wasn't going to do anything. The only thing left to do was to go back to McDonald's and hope that Doris was there again. I was supposed to meet my sister for dinner, but I canceled and went back to find Doris. She wasn't there, but the same woman was working at the counter. Even though she was busy serving customers, I asked her if she could help me. I started to explain that I'd been there a week before, and she cut me off. "I remember you," she said. "You were the girl sitting in the back of the restaurant talking to yourself." "No," I told her. "I was with an old lady. She had a big flowered hat." The girl shook her head. "No, you were alone. I definitely remember that. It kind of freaked me out." I didn't understand. She had to have seen the old woman sitting with me. I didn't know what else to say though, so I thanked her for her time and left. When I got back to Emily's house, she was waiting for me on the porch. She was smoking a cigarette, which is something she did when she was upset. I asked her what was wrong, instantly worried that this had something to do with Sam's disappearance. She started yelling at me. She said that I was a terrible house guest. She was mad that I'd canceled on our dinner. She said that I'd been rude to her from the moment I moved in. I had no idea she felt that way. I guess I was so preoccupied with Sam's disappearance that maybe I didn't realize how I was coming across. Looking back, I guess she was right. I was being an ungrateful sister who only cared about myself. I promised her that I'd stop thinking about Sam and start acting more interested in her life. I apologized for missing our dinner. She said that she had fun without me. She met a nice woman who was also eating alone, so they ended up talking for a while. She said that the woman was a good listener, especially as she vented about her frustrations with me. My blood instantly ran cold. "Was her name Doris?" I asked. "How did you know?" Emily asked. "Did she say anything about getting revenge?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, but we were just joking." "Why?" I had no idea what to say after that. It's been 3 days since my sister met Doris. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I live in constant fear that the old woman will find me, and that she'll do the same thing to me that she did to Sam. I have no idea what to do or how to protect myself.
When my mom told me she was planning to move her meth head boyfriend in with us, well, to say that I was pissed would be an understatement. I told her absolutely not and put my foot down. It was either him or me. Our relationship had been on a rocky terrain ever since Dad died, and I spent the following years in and out of juvie for delinquent behavior. So, unsurprisingly, she chose him. She said it was her house, and if I didn't like it, I should move out. And I did. The apartment hunting process was a complete nightmare. My mom's house was on the outskirts of the Wicker Park, but I quickly found out that my crappy retail job didn't pay enough for me to be near the area. I got word from a friend of a friend about a vacancy in the building where her cousin lived, in Englewood of all places, and it was supposedly fully furnished. The area was sketchy, to say the least. Not that my previous neighborhood was a dream of suburbia, but I knew where I should and shouldn't go and who not to mess with. The prospect of having to learn that all over again was extremely exhausting. The placement of the apartment inside the building was very odd, too. After getting out of the elevator and walking through the main apartment hall, there was a narrow passageway at the end that led to two other doors, apartments 26 and 27. It felt a little like walking into an escape room type of scenario. Only worse, because I was supposed to live there. At least the landlord was nice enough, with strong grandfather vibes, despite not looking like he was old enough to be one. He said, "I was lucky because that was the last unit available." Well, I wasn't sure if lucky was how I felt, more like desperately out of options. The inside of the apartment was bleak. The walls were of a faded gray color, or perhaps just extremely dirty white walls. It was open concept in that it had 4 walls and not a single division for anything. Well, at least it came with a small built-in closet. One of the other walls, however, was decorated with a painting, the only speck of color in the whole place. Mr. Williams must have noticed me looking because he said, "Oh, the previous tenant left this behind. She was a troubled young woman. Very troubled, but very talented, too. She actually painted that." "She was a painter?" I asked. Not professionally, I don't think so. I'm ashamed to say that I still don't know much about her. And no one came to collect her things after. That's why..." Right, that was where the furniture came from. She left it behind. "What happened to her?" He made a vaguely distant hand gesture. "Well, all we know is that she went missing. Just puff. Never seen or heard from again." He continued on by giving me some very alarming information about the crimes that happened in the area, and that I absolutely should check all the windows every single day, especially the one that led to the fire escape. I couldn't do anything that first night aside from staring at the window waiting for an unknown creep to try and snatch me away from bed. The bed that belonged to a woman who was probably dead. 2 weeks in, I was pretty much used to the place and the surroundings. What I could not get used to were the weird noises I heard on a nightly basis. It sounded like a whispered singing mixed with alternating cries. Just so fucking creepy. And the smell. Sometimes at night I would wake up to the smell of something burning. It was faint. Not like someone forgetting their dinner on the stove, but like a candle that had been left burning for too long. It had to be coming from apartment 27. It was the only one close enough to mine. I talked to Mr. Williams about it. He gave a full belly laugh in response, suggesting I was hearing ghosts, because no one lived in apartment 27. Very confusing, since he mentioned that my unit was the last one available. And that had to mean that apartment 27 was occupied, right? "Oh, it was the last unit available. Apartment 27 has been vacant for almost 2 years after the owner died. The inspector said it's unsafe to live in because of all the black mold inside." I was about to protest, but he spoke before me. "Oh, don't worry, it was fully sealed. Nothing of this bad stuff is getting out." "Why not just fix the place?" I demanded. There's some sort of legal battle happening between his kids, and until then, no one can touch the place." Mr. Williams then said that I shared a wall with the bathroom from apartment 25, and that was probably where the noises came from. It was plausible enough, but I was still not fully convinced. Spending many years in and out of juvie taught me to always be skeptical and never take things at face value. Something else that I learned there was how to pick a lock in record time. So, when I heard the noises again 4 nights later and confirmed that they seemed to come from apartment 27, I decided to investigate. The door, when it opened, made a small creaking sound that seemed to echo inside the place. To me, that meant the place was probably empty, or had very little furniture. The little I could see seemed to corroborate Mr. Williams' statement about it being abandoned and sealed off. And it smelled like that, too. The air was stale, but at the same time there was a rancid quality to it, like trash forgotten in the corner for too long. Using the flash on my phone as a guide, I scanned the place looking for the supposed black mold, but didn't find any. The place looked dirty, abandoned, and decayed, but nothing that seemed contagious. All the windows had been covered, though, and not with a slab of wood or something removable. No, they were cemented over. And That didn't sit well with me. When I continued to explore, I noticed that, different from my apartment, there was actually a division that appeared to be a small room. Something told me that I should just drop it and get out of there, forget the whole thing, and just go to sleep. But I was never the one to listen to reason anyway. I walked towards the room with unsure steps and opened the door. The first thing I noticed was a new smell. Putrid, gag-inducing, and impossible to ignore. I dropped my phone, desperately trying to cover my nose and mouth, but it didn't work. The stench clung to the back of my throat, and I almost threw up inside my mouth because of it. When I finally recovered and grabbed my phone, the light shone on the corner of the room, and I was confronted with the worst sight I had ever seen. A woman lying on top of a soiled mattress and chained to the wall. I couldn't believe my eyes. It had to be a very vivid nightmare. I just couldn't believe it. Well, it became all the more real when she noticed my presence. She tried to reach out to me, but was so weak that her arms gave up mid-movement. When I crouched close to her, I noticed that she had marks all over her skin. Burn marks. All that time, I had been smelling her skin being burned. Suddenly, I couldn't hold the contents of my stomach for a single second more, and everything spilled out of me with a violent burst. How long had she been there? What kind of monster would do that to someone? The acridness of the bile mixed with the repugnant smells coming from her made for an even more repulsive combination. Please, he'll be back soon. A shiver ran down my spine. There was nothing around that I could use to get her out of the chains. How the hell was I supposed to help her? I couldn't finish my sentence when I heard the creaking echo again. I immediately knew that someone had gotten in. He had gotten in. But what would happen if he found me here? That I had discovered his twisted secret. I knew that I had to get out of there, but there weren't any windows or doors to escape. I couldn't get out from where I came in. He was on the other side. Please, help, she begged me again, but I was too afraid to do anything. He was going to kill me. Or worse, put me in her place and force me to go through that horrendous torture every night. All I cared about was surviving. My eyes landed on the built-in closet, and I moved just as she reached, desperately holding on to me. Her overgrown nails left angry red marks down my arm when I managed to slip away from her grip. In the commotion, my hand slipped on my own vomit, but there wasn't enough time to care about how disgusting it had been. I hid in the closet and waited. When he got inside the bedroom, I could only see bits and pieces of his legs from the small slats of the closet door. But I heard the jangling of keys as he slowly approached her. My mind immediately made the connection. It was the sound I heard every time Mr. Williams was nearby. And sure enough, the man crouched beside her and I could see his face. It was him, my landlord. He stared at her with a perverse smile, playing with her hair as she whimpered in fear. It was impossible for my brain to recognize the kind man who had been nothing but helpful to me as the horrible monster I was staring at. When he took a lighter from his pocket, I knew what was about to happen. It was too much. I couldn't stand it. I closed my eyes just as the smell of burning flesh took over the room. She cried loudly once, but then suddenly stopped. He was saying something to her too, whispering, but I couldn't make out what it was. I didn't want to. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 and put the phone down, hoping that her muffled noises would be loud enough for them to hear. I couldn't say how long I stood there, just watching through the slats as he ran the flame up and down her body. Still, she didn't do anything that would reveal my presence. Even though she had been suffering for so long, she was trying to protect me. I was completely paralyzed by fear, but if she was strong enough to help, I had to do the same. Feeling for something around me, I managed to find what felt like an old rusty nail. It wasn't too big, but it was long enough for me to put in between my fingers, and it was sharp. I was 2 seconds away from completely losing my resolve when divine intervention came in the form of police sirens echoing nearby. It distracted him enough for me to get out of the closet in a desperate jump. The element of surprise was the only thing I had on my side, and I used it to lunge at him. We fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs. He was so much heavier than me, pinning me to the ground fully with his weight. But I was faster. When he moved one arm to reach for the lighter, I quickly jabbed the sharp end of the nail in between his ribs, over and over again, dragging it across any expanse of skin I could find. He stumbled away from me, clawing, gasping for air. I wasn't going to waste the chance. I grabbed the nail and jammed it on the back of his neck. He made the most horrible gurgling noise, and then he fainted. The police sirens were really loud by then. Yep, they were definitely outside our building. The woman and I stared at each other, terrified and relieved in equal manner. The nightmare was over, and we were both safe. "Are you the previous tenant from apartment 26? I asked. She simply nodded in response. "Yeah, I'm about to move out myself," she said, and gave me a smile. My name is Ellen. Last spring, I divorced my husband of 16 years, Robert. I thought we were happy together, but he'd been cheating on me for years. When I finally caught him in the act, I left and never looked back. I got my own condo near my work and tried to restart my life. Robert and I had never had any kids of our own. That was Robert's idea, of course. And now I am too old to have a family. Honestly, this year has been the worst of my life. Everything I thought I knew about my husband was wrong, and I really didn't want to see any of my friends. They all sided with me in the divorce, of course, but I couldn't stand their sympathetic looks. They all pitied me, and I didn't want to deal with that right now. So I decided to do my best to make a new friend group. Right away, I met my new neighbor, Lainey, and I knew that she'd make a good friend. She was friendly and funny. She came over and introduced herself, and she didn't ask me any embarrassing questions, like why I was all alone at this stage of my life. On that first meeting, we drank coffee and talked for hours. I got a really good feeling about her. It was only after Lainey left that I noticed something odd. I went into my bathroom, which Lainey had used during her visit, and I noticed that my medicine drawer was wide open. She must have rifled around in there. She must have seen all the anti-anxiety medication I was on. This was a clear invasion of privacy, but I forced myself to forget about it. After all, I really needed a friend. 2 days later, Lainey showed up at my door with a casserole. I let her in, and we had a pretty nice chat. At first. Over time, though, she started asking me strange questions. She asked if I'd had any visions since I'd moved in, if any objects had been moved, if I'd heard any voices telling me to do something. I honestly didn't know how to answer. She must have thought I was insane from all the medication I was on. Lainey saw how uncomfortable I felt because she said, "It's nothing personal, Ellen. This condo's just... well, the people who move in here tend to have some strange experiences. I just want you to be prepared." "What are you saying?" I asked. "That my condo's haunted?" "Maybe," she said. She looked deadly serious. "A few years back, a married couple moved in. They seemed happy at first, but the husband had a wandering eye, and when the wife found out, well, she bought a gun and..." Lainey's voice trailed off. "Someone got murdered here?" I asked. She nodded gravely. "And ever since then, residents don't stay here long. But you're the first single person to rent this place, so maybe you're different. Maybe you won't notice anything at all." She left pretty soon after that, acting like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Robert walking into the house, and then me shooting him dead. It was horrifying. And I hated Robert more than anyone in the world, but I didn't want to see him get murdered. Eventually, I fell asleep. But around 3 a.m, I jerked awake. Someone was downstairs. I could hear footsteps. Ignoring my fear, I went downstairs and turned on all the lights. No one was there. But I noticed that both my front and back door were wide open, and there were bits of paper scattered all around the floor. When I got closer, I realized that they weren't papers. They were cut-up wedding photos. Someone had snuck in and found my wedding album in one of my still-packed boxes. They'd cut out every photo of Robert, using a Sharpie to scratch out his face and draw X's over his eyes. Who did this? Was it Lainey just trying to mess with me? Was it Robert, who somehow tracked down my new address? Or was it something else? I closed and locked both doors and then picked up all the photos. I dumped them all into a drawer. I figured that if someone was messing with me, I'd need to have the evidence. When everything was cleaned up and I was sure that no one else was in the condo, I headed back upstairs. That's when I heard the voice. It sounded like Robert's, only deeper. It said, "Kill him, Ellen. Kill him." I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from every direction, from the walls themselves. "Shut up!" I screamed and ran into my bedroom. I got back under the covers and tried to go back to sleep, but I kept hearing that voice. "Kill him, Ellen." The next day, I went next door to visit Lainey. I needed answers. She looked like she was expecting me. She invited me inside, and we sat at her coffee table. "You're scared," she said. "Did something happen?" For some reason, she put her purse in the middle of the table. I didn't know why. "Yeah," I answered. "It was like you said. Last night, I heard voices. Terrible voices." "And what did they tell you to do?" She looked down at her purse and then back at me. "They told me to kill," I said. "And was there anything else?" she asked. "Did you see anything?" Lainey had a very strange expression on her face. She was almost smiling. "There were torn-up photos of my ex-husband on the floor," I said. "They were defaced." "Interesting," Lainey said. She fiddled with a strap on her purse. "Now, do you remember tearing up those photos?" "No," I said. "It wasn't me." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Perhaps you weren't aware of what you were doing." "Are you saying I'm crazy?" "All I'm saying is that you found Robert's torn-up photos, and a voice was telling you to kill him. Maybe you've just been pushed too far. Maybe you need help." I jumped out of my chair. Everything was finally becoming clear. "How did you know his name was Robert?" I asked. "I never told you his name." Lainey's expression instantly dropped. She grabbed her purse and stood up too. "Maybe you should leave." I was not going to leave. Not since I knew what Lainey was up to. I grabbed the purse from her arms and opened it. Her cell phone was hidden inside, recording our entire conversation. "It's not what you think," Lainey said. "You don't even know what I think," I screamed at her. "Let me tell you what I think. I think that you snuck into my house and cut up those photos yourself. I think you made up the whole story about my condo being haunted just to keep me on edge." "But the voices you've been hearing," she protested. "You switched my medications. On the first day you visited me, I saw that my medicine cabinet was open. You planted that stupid ghost story in my head. You talked about the other residents hearing voices, and you knew that the same thing would happen to me because of whatever crazy pills you put in my medicine cabinet. Is that right?" Lainey slowly began to smile. "I guess you figured out everything, huh?" "But why?" I asked. "I don't even know you." "But I know you," she said. "Robert's told me everything about you. You're the reason he and I can't be together." I gasped. She was one of the women Robert had been sleeping with. But what did she want from me? You took everything from him in the divorce, she explained. His money's what's paying for your condo, right? That wasn't right at all. I barely got anything in the divorce. Well, all I needed to do was show the world how insane you really are, she said. And once you're locked up, Robert will be free of you forever. And he and I will finally start our new life. He loves me, you know. Now give me back my purse. Okay, I said. I'll give it back. But there are two things you need to know. For one thing, your phone is still recording. So I have your confession. She shrugged. She knew that she could just take her phone back from me and delete the parts that made her look bad. And two, I said, Robert doesn't love you. He slept with dozens of women during our marriage. I made him write down a list of names. And guess what? He didn't include yours. I guess he forgot about you. Lainey instantly went wild. She lunged at me, ready to rip me apart. But I took her purse and struck her so hard on the side of the head that she flew backwards and landed right on top of her glass coffee table. It shattered under her. As she lay there, I called the police. When they arrived, I played them the whole recording. They instantly took Lainey away. Coincidentally, Robert called me the next day to ask if I'd agree to a delay in his divorce payments. I said sure. I had enough money for now. I told him about what Lainey tried to do, and he just laughed. Yeah, he said. Out of all my girlfriends, she was the crazy one. Look, I was running late, that's it. Nothing nefarious. I took a nap. It was supposed to be a power nap, and I hit snooze a couple of times. I'm sorry I don't have photo evidence of me sleeping in my apartment. So I was already running behind, and then I had to stop to get wine or flowers or something for Sandy. Tate has told me so many times how annoyed Sandy gets when I show up empty-handed to her dinner parties. And I explained to him it can't be considered a dinner party if it's just them and me. There at least has to be one other person. I want to say there needs to be at least two other people, but I'm not winning any arguments here, clearly. If I had known what crazy stuff they were cooking up besides the promised mac and cheese, I would have flaked on the whole affair. Anyway, I guess it started in my apartment when I finally woke up. It wasn't my alarm that woke me up, it was thunder. It was an absolute downpour. It pounded against the building. I got up and checked the time. I fluffed my hair to make it look like I didn't just wake up, grabbed my raincoat, and was out the door. The rain was falling so hard and fast that my windshield wipers were on the highest setting, and I still couldn't see the road. I stopped at the grocery store and purchased some wine and flowers, exactly what Tate said Sandy wanted. Then I sped over to their place. I could tell something was off when they opened their door to welcome me inside. Late, again, Sandy started. She looked at Tate as if to say, I told you so, but she's always kind of a bitch towards me. I didn't think anything of it. It smells amazing, I told her. She responded with an mm-hmm and walked away. I turned to Tate to be like, what the heck? But the guy wouldn't make eye contact with me. We followed Sandy into the dining room. They set the plates, so they sat on one side of the table together, directly across from me, just like you and me now. Dinner party? It was an interrogation. She brought out the mac and cheese, a sight to behold. I'm not her biggest fan, and she's not mine, but the woman can cook. I don't think I even took 2 bites before Tate accused me. James, he started with a deep sigh. We know. Know what? I asked. We know why you're always late and look so disheveled. I thought it was a joke, so I chuckled. I let out a reasonable chuckle, and Sandy was so disgusted. How many? Sandy spit out at me. I gave her a confused look. How many alarms? I asked. Tate cut in. How many people, James, have you killed? We know that you're behind the string of missing people that's been all over the news. At this point, I still thought it was a joke, so I laughed. They were so severe, though, both of them leering at me across the table. I asked them if they were joking, and Tate gave me a firm no. He claimed to have evidence and pulled out a fat folder. They started showing me all of it. There were so many pictures of a guy that looked like me all over town. I mean, I see it. We have the same nose and the same eye color, but we have different hairlines. I have a widow's peak. Look, it's receding. That guy has a whole head of hair. It happens to be shaved down to roughly the same length as mine, I said. Trying to defend myself, I pointed out that I don't own a jacket like the man in the pictures. I asked if they had ever seen me in a jacket like that. Sandy turned to Tate and said, "He knew we were suspicious and destroyed evidence. He probably has taken other precautionary measures in case someone found him out." Tate looked at me and told me there was more that they had found. He led me back to his office to show me a massive bulletin board with all the missing people and where I was when they took place. Many of them went missing around Sandy's dinners. So I guess, because I was late, they thought it was because I was murdering someone. Except I had a solid alibi. For Jessica, on the 28th, I wasn't in town. I was 2 hours away from my aunt's funeral. They said I could have easily driven there and back in the time she went missing, so it wasn't solid enough. They weren't listening to reason. So I had enough and tried to leave. Apparently, Tate took my keys when he took my raincoat when they so warmly welcomed me into their home. The rain was coming down so hard, but I still considered making a run for it. They were convinced I had killed those people. Sandy asked why I would do something like this, and I told her I didn't do anything. I don't know why someone would do that because I'm not someone who would. Sandy and Tate should know that. I've known Tate since 4th grade. No one knows me better than him. I have no idea how he thinks I'm capable of something like this. They were so insistent. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. Tate had my keys. I couldn't leave. I was at their mercy. And then the red and blue lights started flashing. I couldn't process that they called the cops because I was still processing that they thought I could do this. I kept insisting that what they had wasn't solid. It wasn't enough to prove I did what they were claiming. I begged them to see reason and to tell the cops it was a mistake. They refused. They treated me like a stranger. Sorry, I'm still processing that they would do this to me and believe this about me so strongly. The cop looked at me with contempt. "Well, your friends compiled quite a file on you." It can't be enough to hold up in court, though. Like I said, that guy has different hair. You have the wrong guy. I don't know where my friends got this idea. It's completely out of left field. Completely. They said you were clever. They said that you could be manipulative. Tears crowded my eyes. I don't know why they would say that. I swear you have the wrong guy. I tried to sit back, but the cuffs cut into my wrists. I promise I would never do such evil things. The cop didn't break eye contact with me. He simply said, "The court will decide." It's been 6 months since this incident, and still no one believed me. The day of the court ruling came, and they pronounced me guilty on all counts. I was sentenced to life in prison. I consider myself lucky I didn't receive the death sentence. As the guard grabbed my arm to escort me out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man with the same nose and the same colored eyes as me. He was sitting in the back, wearing the jacket they claimed I destroyed, smirking.
Daniel was nice. Oh, who am I kidding? Daniel was great. Pale green eyes and dark brown hair. Perfectly chiseled body. Oof. After 3 weeks of letdowns, I could tell Daniel was going to be one of the better ones. From the get-go, he had the hotel booked and ready. How sweet of him. I love these straight-to-the-point guys. The ones that don't beat around the bush and expect any of that relationship bullshit. Who has time anyway these days? I met Daniel on Tinder just a few hours ago. After scrolling all evening without encountering anyone remotely interesting, his profile caught my eye. Bit of a last-minute arrangement if you ask me. But you know what they say. Spur-of-the-moment decisions are some of the best ones. Sorry about that, he said, stopping me, breaking my reverie. His phone was ringing, and I saw its screen show an unknown caller ID. Great. Do you mind if I pick up? Could be someone from work. He politely asked. Yeah, of course. Not like I'm going anywhere tonight, I said with a wink. A small incentive so he'd remember to finish the call quickly. Daniel gave me a nice sexy smirk in return and picked up the phone. Hello? He looked confused. Who's this? I think you have the wrong person here. He was pacing around the room, then with a worried look plastered across his face, I could faintly hear a woman's voice on the other end of the line. A secret lover? God, maybe he's got a whole other identity and is married with kids. That wouldn't be a first. You can never tell with these guys you meet online. Yes, I'm Daniel Walton, but I'm telling you, I haven't taken a loan, much less one of that sum. You have the wrong number. He sat down on the edge of the bed now. I raised an eyebrow and mouthed, Is everything okay? He nodded, but I could tell things weren't exactly what you would call okay. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Daniel went pale. I'm telling you, I don't know anything about a debt. It's not mine. You're the wrong guy. Leave me alone or I swear I'll... He screamed into the phone and immediately got hung up on. Now I was getting worried. Did I misjudge him? What sort of illegal thing is this guy into? Daniel looked at me in the eye and said, Look, Julia, that was some crazy lady rambling about debts that I need to pay tonight. She said that if I didn't do it willingly, one way or another, her men will make sure that I do. So I think we're gonna have to make a run for it. What? I asked, confused about the whole thing. I have no idea what debt she's... Daniel Walton, open up! Shouted a man on the other side of the door. Damn it, that has to be them now. Well, what do we do? I asked him again. Daniel looked around the room and locked his eyes at the window. We were on the 6th floor, but there was a fire escape outside. The men kept banging on the door. He didn't have to explain. He quickly crossed the room and tried to open them. No go. They were bolted shut. We could hear the men working on the locks, trying to break in. I looked around and saw a particularly heavy desk light and tossed it over to Daniel. He swiftly caught it and threw it out the window, breaking the glass in the process. Freeze! Too late. The men had broken through the door. They held Daniel and me at gunpoint. There were 2 of them, wearing cheap black and white suits. One of them began talking. Daniel Walton, I trust that madam has explained your circumstances. We require your outstanding debt of $500,000 paid in full tonight. We both had our hands up. Daniel looked like a deer in the headlights. He stuttered. I don't remember anything about such a debt. It's not mine. You've got the wrong guy. Please. They slowly moved towards him, holding him at gunpoint. Daniel was getting desperate. Please, he begged them. The same man spoke again. Sir, you have to understand that if you're unable to pay us in full tonight, we're at the liberty to take any one of your organs to cover the outstanding amount. Daniel looked at me. He thought of something. They don't have to be mine, right? Locking eyes with me, he asked them, The organs, they don't have to be mine. I sighed. It always came down to this. I thought at least cute little Daniel Walton here would hold up for a few hours, but no. He's weak like everyone else. Alright boys, that's enough. Wrap him up. Daniel's eyes went wide. He was about to face the men when the bullet hit him square on the forehead. The other guy had fired his gun, the noise contained by a silencer on its muzzle. Wasn't a bad kill at all. On point, exactly what we needed. Remind me to recommend you to my uncle, okay? I whispered into his ears while he knelt over Daniel's dead body. Yes, ma'am, he replied as he helped carry Daniel's body to the bathroom. Oh, and Malta said she would like a word with you, ma'am. Of course she does. I rolled my eyes and threw myself on the bed. That was a complete bummer. It didn't even last 5 minutes. Daniel's phone rang again. The man handed it to me, and sure enough, Malta was on the other end. "Calling to revel in my misery, is it?" I asked as I turned to look at the ceiling. "Oh, come on, did you really look at the profile we compiled on that guy and think he would last more than 5 minutes? Money laundering, aiding, and abetting human trafficking? You can't be serious, right, Talon?" "Oh, I don't know, Malta. Maybe I'm just getting old and soft." "Well, either way, you lost the bet, so family dinner's on you tonight." I sighed. All right, what do you want?" I could hear clicking a pen. "You remember that place at the corner of Chinatown, near the butcher's?" Not sure. Is it above our old speed lab from all those years ago?" "Yeah, that one. Dad loved that Peking duck place, no? We should get him something nice tonight, with all the trouble he's going through with the synthetic substance guys." "Of course. Anything for you and the family, Malta." My name is Jesse, and I usually don't use social media. Back in high school, I was a bit of a cyberbully. I constantly gossiped and badmouthed people. And one time, I even catfished my friend Vanessa. She ended up in front of an abandoned warehouse, hoping to meet her completely made-up boyfriend Michael. She was all dressed up and everything. It was fun, but also pretty mean. Ever since then, I've definitely straightened out. I deleted all my social media accounts and vowed that I would never hurt people like that again. I spent 5 years barely using the internet at all. But on my 25th birthday, I was out with my coworkers and I realized that I needed to make some new friends. I also needed a boyfriend. I was definitely in a social rut and I wanted to fix that. So when I got back home, I created new accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and even Twitter. I tried to track down all my old friends, but I guess I burned a lot of bridges in the past. Very few of my old friends accepted my friend request, and the ones that did were just acquaintances at best. I was really kind of a bitch in the past, but I've grown up so much. I just wanted people to give me a second chance. About a week after opening my accounts, I got a private message on Facebook Messenger from a guy named Tony. I didn't know him, but his profile picture was very handsome. We started chatting and hit it off right away. We had a lot of the same interest, and he seemed like a really good listener. We messaged each other until 3 in the morning. The next day, I saw that Tony friended me on all the other socials. I accepted him as a friend, of course. We hadn't even met him yet, but I was already excited to get to know him. We ended up talking every night for the next week. I asked if he wanted to meet up, and he said, "Not yet." He lived in the same city, but he was still out of town on business. He said he'd get back on Sunday and we'd meet then. One night as we were messaging, he asked me why I had just joined social media. At first, I didn't want to answer, but he was persistent. So I told him everything about the bullying, the catfishing, all of it. I was really embarrassed of the person I used to be, but I really liked this guy and I wanted to be as honest with him as possible. He understood, and he didn't judge me. In fact, some of my wilder stories got him a bit worked up, in a good way. What started as my honest confession of past mistakes led to him calling me a dirty girl and asking me what I was wearing. I never really sexted with guys I hadn't met before. I'd rather just meet them in person, but he really got me going. We sent some pretty explicit messages to each other. One thing led to another, and I ended up sending him some. He said he'd do the same, but as soon as he got my photos, he stopped messaging me altogether. This was when I knew I'd made a mistake. I looked up the company where he supposedly worked, and it didn't exist. I cross-checked his profile picture and found out that it was a stock photo. If you search for a handsome white businessman on Google, his photo is third from the top. I felt like a real idiot, but I was also furious. I messaged him in every way I could, but when it was clear that he wasn't going to respond, I gave up and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone had 80 messages from pretty much everyone I knew. I guess Tony or whoever he was had stuck all my naked photos on Reddit and then linked to it on every other social network. Most of the messages were from my family members who were not happy. My mom even said she wanted to disown me. And the rest were from my supposed friends, but most of them were gloating and surprisingly mean. They seemed happy with my public embarrassment. Trisha, one of my oldest friends, said that I got what was coming to me. Tracy, my best friend since 2nd grade, wrote on my Facebook, "Vanessa finally got you back." So, Tony didn't exist. It was all a scheme cooked up by Vanessa. I was so angry, but I also had a certain level of guilt. I really had hurt her, and I guess she wanted to hurt me back. But all things considered, I had much more anger than guilt. What she did was so much worse than some stupid childhood prank. I opened Facebook, which had already taken down the link and blocked Tony's account, and I looked up Vanessa's real page. It didn't have her address, but it had her workplace. So I got in my car and I drove straight to Vanessa's office building. She worked for a company called Harding & Son. I had no idea what they did, but they'd seemed like a really nice place. I found her sitting in a dimly lit cabin. She was looking at her computer, so she didn't see me until I was standing right in front of her. "Hi, Tony," I said. Vanessa literally jumped out of her chair. She tried to tell me that she had no idea what I was talking about, but I knew that she was lying. Whenever she lied, her stutter came out. That was one of the things that I teased her about when we were younger. Vanessa grabbed her office phone and pressed a single button, probably for security. Before she could say anything into the phone, I grabbed it and threw it onto the desk. "Don't hurt me," she said. "I won't," I said. "As long as you take those photos down and apologize." "Me? Apologize?" she shouted. "You made my life miserable when we were growing up. I was afraid to go to school because of you. The way you criticized my hair or my clothes, and then when you tricked me into going to that awful warehouse." "I'm sorry for being a bully," I said. "I really am. I should have apologized sooner." I just stood there staring at her. I was waiting for her to apologize in return. Vanessa looked at me with a cold, unyielding stare. There was no hint of forgiveness in her eyes, only a glint of something dark and unsettling. "Oh, Jesse," she replied, her voice dripping with a chilling calmness. "Apologize won't erase the scars you left on me. You tormented me for years, and now it's time for you to experience the same pain." I felt a wave of fear wash over me as Vanessa's words sank in. But before I could respond, she revealed her sinister plan. "You see, Jesse, leaking your pictures was just the beginning. I wanted to shatter your life just like you shattered mine. And now, I have something even more twisted in store for you." I tried to back away, but the door behind me was already shut, leaving me trapped in her office. Panic consumed me as Vanessa approached, a wicked smile playing on her lips. She took out a small, ominous-looking vial from her desk and held it up before my eyes. "This," she said, her voice laced with malice, "is a concoction of my own making. A potion that will make you live every single moment of torment you put me through. You'll experience the fear, humiliation, and pain over and over again, just like I did." Before I could comprehend what was happening, Vanessa forcefully poured the potion down my throat. The world around me began to spin, and a searing pain tore through my body. The room blurred, and I felt myself being transported back in time, back to the years when I was a heartless bully. I was trapped in a nightmarish loop, reliving every cruel taunt, every hurtful remark, and every malicious act I'd ever committed against Vanessa and others. The pain and guilt were overwhelming, and I begged for mercy, but there was no escape from the relentless torment. Time lost all meaning as I became a prisoner of my own past, reliving my darkest moments on an endless loop. Each cycle felt longer and more excruciating than the last, and I yearned for release, for a chance to repent and be free of this torment. But Vanessa showed no mercy. She reveled in my suffering, taking sadistic pleasure. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet there was no end in sight to the tortuous cycle. In the end, my mind shattered under the weight of my own guilt and remorse. I became a mere shell of my former self, lost in the never-ending maze of my past. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the horror that had consumed me.
I babysat every Wednesday and Friday for a family that lived a couple of blocks away. Since I was in college, it was a decent way for me to get some extra cash between studying. And I could even take my laptop and get assignments finished while watching the kids. There were two of them, a 10-year-old boy and his younger 7-year-old sister. They were both nice enough for the most part, but the little girl had an odd streak. Sometimes she would say or do things that freaked me out, but I always chalked it down to her being young with an overactive imagination. This particular evening, the parents were going to be home relatively late, and I had to look after the kids for 6 hours, from 6 o'clock to midnight. Everything went smoothly at first. We ate dinner together at the kitchen table, and then I set them down in front of the television for a bit while I cleaned up. When I went back into the living room, Amy was nowhere to be seen. "Jake, where's your sister?" I asked. I hadn't seen her go upstairs. She would have had to slip past the kitchen to reach the staircase, and I'd been facing it most of the time. Jake just shrugged. I sighed, looking around the room. There was only one doorway, which led directly into the kitchen, and I knew she hadn't left. "Amy, where'd you go?" When I got no response, I threw up my hands exasperatedly. Was she hiding from me? She could be a little bit of a trickster when she wanted to be. "All right, Amy, I guess you won't be getting milk and biscuits before bed," I said loudly, keeping an eye out for any movement. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the curtains shuffle briefly around the window. I narrowed my eyes. There was a small shape crouched behind the heavy fabric, the pale glimmer of feet sticking out from beneath it. I rolled my eyes. I wonder where Amy could be, I wandered aloud, walking over the curtain on silent feet. Grasping a handful of material, I flung the curtain open. Amy lunged at me, a manic grin on her face as something silver and sharp glinted in her hand. I stumbled back, my eyes going wide as the girl threw back her head and started to laugh. I grabbed it out of her hand before she could hurt herself. Or me. "Amy, what on earth are you doing with a knife?" I said incredulously, holding it out of her reach. "You know it's dangerous to play with sharp objects. This is not funny." Amy continued to laugh, her cheeks going pink. But Adam told me to do it," she said, the laughter fading. I felt a soft clench in my chest and tried to keep my exasperation down. "Amy, Adam isn't real." Adam had been her imaginary friend since I had started babysitting them, and he was often the one to blame for Amy's tricks. "Yes, he is!" she exclaimed, her voice turning serious, all traces of amusement slipping away. "He's standing right behind you. He's trying to get the knife out of your hand." I instinctively glanced back over my shoulder, moving the knife. Of course there was nobody there. Adam was just a made-up fantasy. He would disappear as soon as Amy got old enough. "All right, but Amy, listen to me," I said, crouching down to face her. "Do not play with knives. Someone could seriously get hurt." Amy's smile widened. "I know," was all she said, before skipping over to the sofa and sitting beside her brother, who was so busy watching television that he was oblivious to it all. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea to try and stay awake. It was just after 9 o'clock, and it was time to put Amy and Jake to bed. I wasn't expecting it to be easy. They normally protested when I tried to get them to go upstairs, but I had managed to bribe them with milk and biscuits before bed, which sometimes did the trick. I took a sip of tea, calming my nerves, and headed upstairs to make sure the kids had finished brushing their teeth. "I want you both in bed by the time I get upstairs," I shouted as I started walking, gripping the banister with my left hand. The landing upstairs was quiet. I couldn't hear anyone still in the bathroom. Maybe they both had finally done what I'd said and gone to bed. I checked on Jake first. He was already tucked up in bed, so I said goodnight and switched off his light before checking in on Amy. Her bed was empty. She wasn't in her room either, which made me utter out another exasperated groan. She was such hard work. "Amy, come on, it's bedtime," I called out, sticking my head out the door. The landing was quiet. Was she hiding again? As long as she didn't have a knife this time. "Amy, your parents will be home soon. You don't want them to find you out of bed, do you?" Still nothing. Rolling my eyes, I went looking for her, but she wasn't in any of the rooms upstairs. Had she gone back down to the living room? With a sigh, I headed back downstairs. As soon as I walked into the kitchen, I let out a short, sharp breath. "What are you doing?" I blurted, my eyes going wide. Amy was standing on one of the kitchen stools, pouring something into my cup of tea. It didn't take me long to realize what was inside the small blue bottle. Bleach. "Amy Williams, get down from there right this second," I shouted, struggling to stay calm. Why was a 7-year-old pouring bleach into my drink? I didn't understand it. I'd never known a child like her. She had such a twisted idea of amusement that sometimes I was scared to come here. She set the bottle of bleach down and stepped off the stool, feigning innocence. Don't shout at me. I don't like it when you shout," she whined, her lips trembling. I pinched my nose, breathing heavily to calm down. "All right. I'm sorry for shouting," I said. "But what you're doing is serious. I think we need to talk to your parents about it." "No!" she screamed, her composure shattering. "Don't tell them, please!" I shook my head. "I have to, Amy. These pranks you've been pulling are dangerous. Someone's going to get hurt. But it's Adam! Adam's the one who tells me to do it," she said, her voice blubbering. "He said if I don't do it, then he'll hurt me." Her words struck a pang of fear in my chest. "But Amy, Adam isn't real. He's just an imaginary friend that you made up. He can't hurt you." Amy started crying then, and I sighed. Kids really were exhausting. "He is real," she sobbed. He is. He's standing right next to you." Okay, shh, I said, softly shushing her. "Why don't you tell me what he looks like then?" Amy sniffed, patting her eyes dry with the sleeves of her pajamas. "He's a kid, like me. He's really pale and has no eyes." Dread punched me in the stomach. "He has no eyes?" Amy shook her head. "No, there's just 2 dark holes where his eyes are supposed to be," she said quietly. "He tells me to do things like put pins in my parents' bed and pour bleach in your tea so that you drink it." I swallowed thickly, trying to wrap my head around what she was telling me. Just who was this Adam? Surely a 7-year-old couldn't make all of this up. "How did you manage to get past the child lock on the bleach?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Adam showed me." The ground suddenly felt wobbly beneath me. I was only a college student. I wasn't equipped to deal with a child's creepy, violent, imaginary friend. "All right, I think we need to have a sit-down with your parents," I said, but Amy started crying again. No, please don't tell them. If you tell them about Adam, then he said he'll hurt me, please." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe her, but I found it hard to believe that she was making everything up. Surely there was a limit on even a child's imagination and the horrors they could conjure. "All right," I said. "I won't tell them. But do you promise to go to bed like a good girl?" She nodded vigorously and ran upstairs. As soon as she had gone, I called her parents to come home early, making sure to tip the bleach-tainted tea down the drain before anyone could accidentally drink it. Later that night, as I was leaving, I saw Amy standing at the windows upstairs, waving at me. As I waved back, for just a moment, I thought I glimpsed a shadow standing behind her. A shadow that belonged to neither her or her brother. But maybe it was just a trick of the light. After that night, I'd never babysat there again.
I was alone on the bus, playing Granny 3 on my phone. I didn't normally ride the bus, especially at nights, but my car was in the shop and I didn't want to spend money on an Uber. Out of nowhere, a woman with long dark hair sat next to me. I didn't even notice her get on the bus. She leaned close to my ear and whispered, "You're going to die." Just then, the Granny character jumped out at me and I lost a life. In the game, the next day started and I had to go back to the beginning and play again. "Told you so," the woman said. I knew that she wanted to talk, so I turned off the game. I thought that was what she wanted, but she seemed kind of disappointed. "I was watching you play," she said. "I love that game." From there, we struck up a conversation, mostly about video games. She said her name was Valerie. I was surprised that a girl as pretty as her would play the same kind of mobile horror games that I did. She seemed to know her stuff too. It didn't take long for us to really hit it off. I built up the courage to ask her for her number. She took out a scrap of paper which seemed really old school and wrote down an address, not a phone number. "This is where I live," she said. "Come here Saturday at 10 p.m. Me and my friends are having a granny tournament. You should come." I agreed, of course. I'd be crazy to turn on a date with someone like her, even if there'd be other people there, and even if Granny seemed like a weird game for a tournament. It wasn't the kind of game that you could play against a bunch of people at the same time. I didn't think about any of that though. I just finished off the work week, picked a nice outfit, and went to her place on Saturday. Thankfully, my car was fixed now, so I drove myself. But when I got to the place, I realized that there might have been a mistake. This house was old and condemned. It even had a sign out front telling people to stay away. This couldn't possibly be her house, but there were a few other cars there, so maybe it was the right place. I went through the creaky old gates, and Valerie stepped out of the darkness to greet me. She asked if I was ready to play. "Sure," I said. "Where are all the others?" "Oh, they already played," she answered. "They lost. You're the last one." "Okay," I said. It was a little creepy, but I wasn't upset that it would just be the two of us. In fact, I preferred that. She walked past me and then locked the gates. She waved the key at me. "This is your ticket to safety. Give me 2 minutes to hide it, and then we can play." Then she ran off. I looked around and realized that she had planned something much more elaborate than I had realized. She didn't just want to play Granny. She wanted to play Granny in real life, with a big spooky house. She probably had little puzzles hidden around the property. Honestly, it seemed really cool. But then, I realized that something was off. If this was the game, then who was Granny? Was it some actor in a costume? And if so, what would Granny do if she caught me? Valerie said that other people had already played the game and lost, but if their cars were still there, then what happened to them? From the distance, Valerie shouted, "Ready!" I checked the lock to make sure it was real. It was. The metal fence around the property had spikes all along the top. I couldn't climb over. That meant that the only thing I could do was play along and hope that this wasn't dangerous. I figured the best place to start was probably at the back of the house, where Valerie had gone. I started in that direction, passing the house's wide open front door. I thought I saw a shape moving inside, but when I looked, no one was there. I looked around the backyard for a bit, but I couldn't find anything. Then I heard a bam. The back door had swung open. I looked up and no one was there. I guess I'd have to look inside now. I walked into the dark house, which didn't have the same layout as the game, but still felt like a real-world version of the game. It was just as creepy. The floorboards creaked under me. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen when I saw a flash of white disappear around the corner. I walked closer and peered around the edge, and there, in the center of the room, was a tall figure in a white nightdress and an old lady mask. This was Valerie's version of Granny. I ran. I made it back to the living room and out the front door. But then, I saw another figure, this one in an old man mask. It was Grandpa, another character from the game. I raced back inside and then ran up the stairs. I know some gamers would find this fun, but I hated it. It felt too real. I looked into each room to see if there was an escape. They were all empty, thankfully. Behind me, I could hear slow footsteps coming up the stairs. I dove into one of the rooms and looked out of the window to see if I could climb out. Luckily, this room was directly over the front porch. I could climb out the window, slide down the sloping roof, and hop onto the ground. I was halfway through the window when I noticed something sticking out of the closet. It was a hand. I knew I didn't have any time, but I had to check it out. I climbed back inside and opened the closet door. There, stashed in this small space like luggage, were 3 bodies. These were the other players of Valerie's sick game. I did not want the same thing to happen to me. I ran back to the window just as Granny had stumbled into the room. She walked closer and closer. I climbed all the way through the window, but Granny grabbed me and tried to pull me back in. The tiles of the roof dug into my stomach as I struggled to push her off me. She wouldn't let go. I reached up to her mask because it was the only thing I could grab onto, and I pulled. The mask came off, revealing that Valerie was wearing the costume. She looked at me with pure hate and then pulled out a knife. She slammed it through my hand, all the way through, pinning it against the windowsill. I never felt such pain. I didn't have anything to lose, so I used my free hand to grab Valerie's dress and pull. In less than a second, she'd fallen through the window and over the edge. Her body slid down the roof, head first, and she landed with a crunch. I looked down and saw her dead on the ground. Her neck was twisted, and the granny mask had landed just a few feet away from her body. I saw Grandpa stand in the distance, staring at me. Then he took off his mask, revealing the face of a guy about our age. I didn't recognize him, but he had similar features to Valerie, like they were siblings. He ran over to her dead body and sobbed. Then he pointed straight at me and said, "Wait right there." He walked inside. I didn't know what to do. My hand was still pinned to the window. I'd killed one of the psychos, but the other one was still coming. I grabbed the hilt of the knife and tried to pull. The pain in my skewered hand was unbearable, but with a loud, horrible pop, I pulled the knife loose. Just in time for the man dressed as Grandpa to reach me. "Wait!" he screamed, but I didn't. I slid down the roof, sat on the edge, and then hopped onto the ground. Then I ran back toward the front gate. With my one good hand, I tried to figure out how to open the lock. It still wouldn't budge. I knew that Grandpa was still coming, and I didn't have the energy to fight him. From the house, he kept calling, "Wait! Wait!" Eventually, I just gave up. There was no way out of this. I just stood by the gate, accepted my fate, and waited for Grandpa to come back and kill me. When the man reached me, he pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the gate. "You're letting me go?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "You won. You killed Granny." This wasn't how you played the game, but I didn't argue. I raced out of there and dove straight to the hospital. While they were fixing my hand, I told the police everything that happened to me. Later, I found out that the police went to the house. They found 5 dead bodies, including Valerie, but the man in the Grandpa costume was never found. The first time I saw him, I'd been no older than 7. I was playing in the ball pit at our local McDonald's play place, along with some other kids my age. My mom was sitting at one of the tables with my baby sister, only half keeping an eye on me as she finished eating her food. One by one, the kids left the ball pit as their families called them back, till I was the only one left, pretending to swim through the ocean of rainbow-colored plastic balls. I didn't see him entering the ball pit. I didn't hear him either, and it was hard to stay quiet. I just turned around, and he was there. "Oh," I muttered in surprise, blinking at the boy. He must have been around my age, with short brown hair and pale skin. There was something almost sad about the way he looked, and beneath the bright lights of the play area, there was something hollow about his face. "Hello," I said, thinking that perhaps he needed a friend. The boy looked at me, his expression blank. "Hi. My name's Josh," I continued, always eager to make new friends. "What's yours?" Instead of answering me, the boy just shrugged. I remember thinking that was odd. Didn't he know his own name? Instead of dwelling on it, I asked him if he wanted to play, and he nodded. After a few minutes, I grew tired of the ball pit and began to climb out. "Let's go play on the slide instead," I suggested, but the boy made no move to follow me. He just stared at me formlessly like he didn't understand. "Or we could stay in the ball pit," I asked him. He nodded again, so I slipped back into the pool, balls scattering around me. After a while, I heard my mom calling my name, so I reluctantly dragged myself back out. "It was nice playing with you," I told the boy. He said nothing, still giving me that blank, hollow look. I shrugged, running off to my mom and sister. "Mom, I made a new friend," I told her, pointing towards the ball pit where the boy had been. But by the time we both turned around, he was already gone. The next time I saw him, I had just turned 8. I was getting a little old to be in the ball pit, but I still enjoyed playing with the ropes and slides in the play place, so I went over there by myself. There weren't many other kids playing there, and after a while, I found myself alone once again. I barely even heard him approach. It was more like a shift in the air, a tremble on the back of my neck. I turned around, and he was just there. He looked exactly the same as last time, the same blank, hollow look on his face, the same chalky pale skin and sunken eyes. "It's you again," I said, "the nameless boy." He cocked his head and gave me a crooked smile, lacking any kind of warmth. I thought maybe I had upset him with the name, but he just shrugged. "Want to play?" I asked, and he nodded. It was mostly me doing the playing and him just standing there, watching me blankly. But I felt guilty leaving him on his own, especially when he seemed so sad and lonely. My mom came to fetch me while I was trying to balance on one of the foam planks, the boy observing me from the shadows. "Josh, it's time to go," she said, carrying my sister against her hip. "All right, Mom," I said, turning back to the boy. "Sorry, I gotta go now. Maybe I'll see you again." The boy said nothing, watching me go with those dark, sunken eyes. I left the play place and my mom gave me a weird look. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, and I shrugged. "You won't tell me his name," was all I said before running to grab my coat. Every time we went to that McDonald's over the next few years, I saw him. Even when I got too old for the play area, I would see him standing in the ball pit, watching me across the room. No other kids interacted with him. Nobody seemed to even notice he was there. The weird thing was that he never aged either. While I grew taller and appeared older, he stayed the same, always with that blank, soulless look on his face. I didn't learn the truth until I was about 11. We went to McDonald's for lunch one day, and I was taking particular interest in all the old black and white photos and newspaper articles that were stuck to the wall and notice board. It seemed as though every piece of history that mentioned this particular branch of McDonald's was memorialized here. Then, I saw him. In an old, grainy photograph attached to a newspaper article dated over a decade ago. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared at the article heading, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. "Boy dies tragically in the play area." The article went on to mourn the loss of Marcus, who had died after having a seizure in the ball pit and suffocating to death. By the time anyone had noticed he was missing, it was already too late, and they ended up pulling his lifeless body out of the ball pit where several other children hadn't even noticed his struggle. I looked again at the picture, but I knew without a doubt that it was him. The boy who I had been seeing for the past 4 years. A shiver touched the back of my neck, and I turned around, my gaze finding his across the room. There he was, the nameless boy, a boy who had died here over 10 years ago. Without a word, he turned and walked over to the ball pit and slid down into the shadows where he had lost his life.
I just couldn't believe Dave would do that. He threw away our 7-year-long relationship just like that. And on the month that I needed him most. Things were crazy at work. It was fashion week. I was pulling overnights every day, sewing my fingers away. But he was busy out there screwing some random girl he'd met on Tinder? Really? Anyway, I guess, in hindsight, I should just move on, right? That was the whole purpose of this trip. This hike, whatever. You know what they say, right? When you're in a rut, go somewhere you've never been before and you might just find yourself. So I thought, screw Dave. I'm going to focus on hiking and camping my way through the forest. It's something I haven't done since my mandatory high school trips, but I do remember that I used to love camping. They made us go annually, and I simply haven't found the time since then. I remember how sleeping in the middle of the woods on those damp tent floors, huddled in sleeping bags, I always slept so well. Those trips were some of the best naps and sleeps I've had in my life, and sleeping was something I didn't get much of these days. But here's the thing. Just like Dave, memories lie. I remembered all the good parts about camping, but I forgot all the bad parts. The bugs, the sore legs, the bad weather, the urge to binge eat all your packed meals in one go. I realized then this was not something I had fully prepared for. And just like that, like an oasis in the desert, I saw a perfectly decent house in the middle of the woods. It looked like a movie set. Erected in the middle of nowhere, USA, and it looked well maintained. I guess somebody must love their privacy, huh? Well, these days, you wouldn't hold it against them. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to take a peek inside the window. But immediately, I was startled by a face staring back. I realized it was a grandmother, smiling at me innocently. Like a thief that had been caught, I was going to hurry and get the hell out of there. But she came to her front door and called out to me. "Dear? Sorry, did I startle you?" I stood there perplexed. It was just a grandmother, right? Albeit a fairy tale-like one. Strange. But yeah, it was just a frail old granny. It's okay. I shouldn't have peeked into your home like that. Oh, no worries. I shouldn't have been looking out the window like that. But my vision's bad and I just had to see who it was at my window. She snorted and laughed, and old folks laughed. Yeah, sorry. Say, dear, I'm trying to get my sewing machine started. There's a hole on my curtain that needs fixing. You don't happen to know how to do that, do you? Just my luck, I thought. Granny needs help with a sewing machine, and her house looks warm enough. Maybe she'll treat me to a nice home-cooked granny meal after, right? Actually, I'm a professional tailor. If you show me what it is you need done, I'll just do it for you. Or I could just show you how to use the sewing machine, any way you prefer. Oh, how wonderful, dear, Granny beamed. Come inside, let me show you. She looked so innocent, frail, warm and welcoming compared to the cold, damp woods outside. And so I just followed her, like a lamb to slaughter. Once I was done sewing her curtains and tablecloth, Granny was ready with a nice hearty meal for me to dig into. It was really nice. I hadn't been home for a while, and home-cooked meals just sat right in the stomach. While we ate, she talked about her life. Granny used to live here with her husband and daughter. Sadly, both of them have passed away. Her daughter's husband and her daughter, Granny's granddaughter, lived in the city, in a nice home by a nice park. They would visit her from time to time, but otherwise, she was here all alone, just enjoying a nice, quiet life. Granny even shared how at this point she was ready to die. She'd seen and did everything she wanted to do. There was nothing more she wanted, and yet here she was, still here. So she tried to make the best of her days. That was strangely dark and heartwarming tale at the same time. When we were done with our meals, Granny offered me a room for the night, which, looking at the fog rising outside, I took her offer up in a heartbeat. I woke up the next morning having slept ridiculously well, just like I did back in those camping nights. Feeling refreshed, I was eager to get out there and continue my hike. But then I looked around and realized I was in a completely different room. Gone was the old cozy bedroom I had slept in, and in its place was an older, rickety home, with peeling paint and barely any light around. I went out of my room and realized I was inside a completely different house. It mirrored Granny's home in a certain way, but this couldn't be the same place. It was as if Granny's house had burned down and we were in a makeshift home built over it. I headed straight for the front door, but they were padlocked, with 5 padlocks on them. What? And the windows were barred. Hello? I shouted. No one replied. Granny was nowhere to be found. It seemed like the house was empty. Oh no, this has got to be one of those human trafficking schemes. Granny was definitely a front. She was in on the whole operation, and now they're going to come and kidnap me. I panicked and began ransacking the home for a way out. When I eventually made my way down to the basement, I froze. I realized that I might be dealing with something worse. The basement floors were covered in blood, and at the far corner of the room was a sink containing a chopped up arm and torso. This wasn't human trafficking. This was organ harvesting. They don't intend on letting me walk out of here alive. "Dear, are you awake? Come have breakfast," sang Granny from upstairs. Quickly, I hid myself behind some boxes in a niche on the wall. Granny went down the steps then, and I saw that she was no longer the frail old woman I helped yesterday. She stood towering over me and walked with a strange gait, her skin falling off in places. And when she turned around, she had a hole on her cheek. I loudly gasped. I couldn't believe my eyes. She was living dead. "There you are, dear," she said with an eerie smile plastered across her face. Before I had a chance to react, Granny had rammed her body through the boxes and pinned me to the wall. My reflexes had caught her wrist just in time, keeping away the kitchen knife she held. I was so scared of how she looked that I hadn't even registered the knife. Disgusting, rotting flesh all around. I realized then that despite everything, she was living dead. I had the upper hand. I had living muscles. With all my might, I pushed her off, took the knife, and with one slice slit her throat, and went running up the stairs. I heard her get up as I ran up the steps, imagining a nearly headless Granny chasing me. Back in the bedroom I slept in, I went out of the window, climbed down, and ran like hell, knowing I would never willingly do another hike for a long, long time.